Let's kick off the meeting here. Tonight's a public hearing. Very important meeting for us. So let me call the meeting to order. Grant permission to the Westwood Media Center to live stream and record the meeting, and asking if there's anyone here, anyone else who would like to record. Not hearing that. Let's go forward. Certain preamble that we always do pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order. This public hearing of the Finance and Warrant Commission of Westwood, Massachusetts is being conducted largely by remote participation. The public is encouraged to join the meeting and participate fully. Members of the public attending the meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during portions of the hearing designated for public comment. You will be queued up in the system and the operator, and you will be prompted when to speak. The chair will continue to give guidance and instructions as needed. So in terms of my comments to kind of start the meeting out, as I said, this is a very important meeting as we're going to get testimony on a lot of the warrant articles. It's really, just to clarify, we're not voting here tonight, but we're here to listen, ask questions, and try to understand the warrants well enough for us to eventually vote on those in the tail end of the month, and also to do our write-ups. The public input here is really important. So what we've done is we've actually revised what we normally do. So we're allowing for public input after each presentation. So we have 2 different presentations tonight related to the select board articles, the planning board articles, and the school committee article. So what we're going to do is get public comment and questions after the presentations of each and after FinCom members' questions. So what we're going to do is we're asking the public to use the Zoom function to raise their hand. We're keeping track of folks raising their hands, and they will be brought into the meeting for any comments and questions in the order of which we see their hand being raised. Potentially after that, if there are written Q&A that aren't redundant, we will address those Q&A. So, okay, so let's Jane, if you could announce the members.
Certainly, I'm going to call the roll. Peter Lentz.
Here.
Bill Bruce.
Here.
Jim Ferraro.
Here.
Lauren Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Craig Fiscaldo.
Here.
George Hertz.
Here.
Angela Hughes.
Here.
Peter Ittig.
Here.
Caitlin Jerzak.
Here.
Tom Kilgariff.
Here.
George Lahan.
Here.
Chris Pareda. Mike Powers.
Here.
Kate Wynn.
Here.
Okay, so let's first do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we're going to start out tonight with the select board warrant articles. And so we have a few folks on the line. At the very least, I believe we have Chris Coleman, Pam Dukeman. The select board is here, John Hickey, Pat Ahern is here, and maybe more. So can't see them all. So I see that that's probably Pam sharing her screen at this point in time.
That's Tish Healy.
Actually, Tish. Yep. Thank you.
Just doing it. And then, so Pam, if you're ready to start, you've got the floor.
Yeah, actually, I think Chris or John
Chris Coleman is going
is doing this tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're trying to give Pam the night off tonight. We'll see what we can do with that.
I'll take it.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. So I believe Todd Korchin is also in the, I don't know if he's in the room yet, but he's in the, he might be a panel, an attendee. But if I can just go down as we get Todd in here to talk about Cranston Road, just to let the Finance and Warrant Commission know what happened at this evening's select board meeting. So at this evening's select board meeting pertaining to the warrant listing of the warrant articles, the select board voted to withdraw select board articles 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So I'll repeat that just so everyone can hear. Select board 4, which is regarding 4 and 5 are regarding the Obed Baker House. 6, 7, and 8 were placeholders for community and economic development. 6, 7, and 8, excuse me. And 9 was the care and maintenance of private fire hydrants. And just to make sure the Finance and Warrant Commission are aware, when it comes to Select Board Article 9, the care and maintenance of the private fire hydrants, this is certainly still in a very important matter. Chief Deckers and I felt strongly that there is still some reconciliation that needs to happen before we bring this matter forward to town meeting. He's working, he and the fire department are working closely with the Dedham Westwood Water District. So this may be something that comes back at a future town meeting. The select board also voted to use miscellaneous Article 1 for for now what is considered budget item 14, which is the DPW vehicle and the fire multi-purpose vehicle, and that's the article to borrow. And then also the planning board has asked to break out 2 of their planning board articles, which you'll hear later this evening. And the select board voted to use miscellaneous articles 2 and 3 for the planning board. So if Mr. Chair, if you'd like, I can certainly read how that will look when it comes to the planning board articles as we go forward.
Sure.
So planning board, thank you. Planning board's articles 1 and 2 will remain the same. Planning board article 3 will now be zoning amendments related to medical uses, medical centers and clinics and offices of healthcare professionals. The 2 new articles that will be using miscellaneous number 2 and 3. This is Planning Board 4, which is a zoning amendment related to medical uses prohibiting hospitals. And Planning Board 5 is a zoning amendments related to medical uses creating substance rehabilitation facility overlay district. Planning Board 6 will now be the housekeeping zoning article, which was previously Planning Board 4. And if anyone needs me to repeat that, I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to go into the select board non-financial articles, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Is Todd with us?
I am, Chris.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, just to give you a quick little overview, this would be a street acceptance of Cranston Avenue. This was something that the select board had on the warrant for last year prior to the injunction to reduce the quorum and also reducing the articles to just the financial articles. This is something the DPW has been working with the residents on Cranston Ave. And Todd, if you just want to talk about a little bit about this process, the construction work is estimated to be around $31,000. This would be a betterment. Half of it will be paid by the residents, half of it will be paid by the town going forward. But I'll let Todd speak to the details.
Yeah, essentially what we're looking at doing is just obviously bringing the road up to town standards prior to us having a formal acceptance of Cranston. And we obtained a cost estimate from Beta Group from our pavement management program that read out to approximately $31,000. So obviously has a pretty decent contingency built into it. So the hope is that it comes in a little bit cheaper, but that would be ultimately the worst case scenario. And that $31,000, as Chris had mentioned, would be divided by 2. The town would absorb 50% of that cost. And then the remainder of the balance would be split 3 ways from the 3 abutters on Cranston. And we've received signed letters acknowledging the process and the willingness of all the residents on Cranston to participate in this in eagerness. So we feel very confident in this process. We've done it before in a couple of different locations throughout town, and this is really there's really not much to this as far as bringing Cranston up to the town standards that we want to see prior to a formal acceptance.
Okay.
If there are no questions, thank you very much, Todd. Select Board Article 2 and 3, this is regarding the Westwood Lodge property. Select Board Article 2 is basically transferring ownership, accepting municipal ownership for the soccer and lacrosse field. And Article 3 is referring to the property of LifeWorks, and Nora's here to speak to the details of both of those.
Yes, thank you. So Article 2 is the acceptance of the soccer and lacrosse field that's at the former Westwood Lodge site, which is the site has now been redeveloped as the Homes at 45, a project by the Green Company. This was approved some time ago and the construction has actually begun, and the intention was to do this at the last town meeting in 2020. As a non-financial article, it was put off. So the Green Company still owns both of these properties, the soccer lacrosse field, and then when we speak next about the lot 1. So the soccer lacrosse field is being leased to the town and it's continuing in its traditional use as a lacrosse and youth soccer field. And we'd like to take ownership of the property so that we can continue that indefinitely. It's been offered to the town for, Pat Ahern can speak to this, I forget if it's $1 or $10, whatever the nominal amount is in the deed transfer. We've received the field. It's been, it's in the same state as it has always been in. It's been maintained by the DPW for years. The only difference is we now have a parking lot associated with it. The Green Company has created a 40-space parking lot right next to that, which will be right on the property next to the field. So that would become the town's parking lot to go along with the field. And the deed arrangement would allow for the budding neighbor, Temple Beth David, to use that parking lot when they can do so without interfering with recreational sports programs. So it becomes a community use for both the town, for our youth sports fields, as well as for the temple. And then the LifeWorks one, this is LifeWorks. This is lot 1, which was also part of that former Westwood Lodge. This is on Clabbertree Street. It's a lot that was created by approval not required just outside of the Homes at 45 development. And it has been used to construct a group home that's operated by the LifeWorks company. And it's been operating, I believe, since, I can't remember, sometime over the summer, maybe September, August or September. They have been operating as a group home that has 5 residents. And it's listed on our, eligible for listing on our subsidized inventory. So we get credit for all 5 of those residents' living accommodations in that. So it's 5 units on the subsidized housing inventory. So that property is currently still owned by the Green Company. It's leased to LifeWorks. The deed would have the town take over the property and also take over the lease, so that the town would now become the party that leased the property to LifeWorks. LifeWorks would continue it indefinitely. In that case, I believe the lease between LifeWorks and the town is for 99 years, also for $1, $10, whatever the figure that was put in the deed was. But the town would own the property. And the reason we would like ownership of this is to make sure that we control the property. So if anything ever happens and LifeWorks is no longer able to run a group home at that facility, the town would take it over, would have the opportunity to either find another group home operator so that we could keep these units on the subsidized housing inventory, or if that wasn't feasible, the town could convert the property into an affordable unit or 2 affordable units and then move on and keep the properties listed on the subsidized inventory.
I have a question about the soccer field. Shall I wait?
2 different properties. So the soccer field is part of Select Board Article 2, completely separate from the LifeWorks group home that's on Select Board Article 3. But they're both, we're looking for the same treatment for the town to accept receipt of both properties from the Green Development Company.
My question concerns the adjacent road. The parking lot empties onto the road that is labeled Abbey Road, which might be a Beatles reference there, I guess. But my question concerns who will be responsible for maintaining that road. since it's the only access to the parking lot. And as you say, it will be a community facility.
Right, so that will be a private road for the indefinite future. I don't know if at some point in the future, the Green Company will look to have that become a public road, but for certainly for the development process, which will continue over, I believe, 5 phases over probably the next 2 years, that will be a private road, and the town's access to the field over that road will be covered by an easement.
Thank you.
So per our plan here, we would prefer that questions be done at the end of the presentation, just to make sure that we can get all the presentations in a timely manner. And so I allowed that one, but let's, if we could, wait till the end of the select board presentation, then we'll ask all questions and comments at the end.
Chris, you're muted.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, with the select board's vote earlier this evening to withdraw select board articles 4 through 9, that would end our presentation this evening for our non-financial articles.
So let me open this up to FinCom members right now, if they have any questions or comments about the presentation.
Craig Fuscaldo.
Go ahead, Craig.
My only question is, Chris, what was the reason why the articles pertaining to the Obed Baker House, why were they removed?
We have been working with the developer, and in short, the developer isn't ready to bring this matter forward, but I can certainly ask Nora to give you some more details on that if you like.
Sure. So this was a property that I'm sure you recall, we've put out requests for proposal many times over the years. And the most recent one, we received a single proposal last February. The proposal came in just before the pandemic shutdown. And the proposed developer, Todd Sullivan, has been working on putting together plans for the property, but his attention was elsewhere, and we just didn't get it done in time. We had a renewed effort in January and February trying to get to the point where we had a proposal that had all the I's dotted, T's crossed, ready to come before you, and we're just not there yet. So he's going to put it off of this article, of this town meeting, delve into the project in more detail, work with Public Works, work with the Select Board, and go before the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission for the preliminary meetings to discuss the project, and then come back for a future town meeting.
Thank you.
I just have one small comment about the street acceptance and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like this is very consistent with a lot of the other street acceptances that we've done in the past, where we ask the residents to pay for half. So it's something that's, in my mind, is not out of the ordinary. It's the way we.
This is Christopher. You are correct.
Yeah. Okay. Any other from FinCom questions or comments regarding the select board articles that are here? Not hearing any. I would, Jane, are there any folks in the queue that have raised their hand?
Anyone raising their hands? Oh,
Okay. And looking at Q&A, I do
no,
not.
there's nothing. Nope.
I do not see any questions also. So thank you for that. We're ahead of schedule. We'll see how that goes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, FinCom, and Pat, Nora, and Todd. And
Thank
Tish
you.
especially. Thank you.
Thank you to Chris and the presenters. So next we would have the planning board articles. We have Abby and Dave and Rob Gotti, I believe. So I'll leave it up to you to say who's going to present. So I'm sorry, I might not have heard that. Who's going to present the planning?
Abby, and Abby is with us.
Okay. Hey, Abby.
So first of all, we need to call the meeting to order since we're kind of having an overlapping meeting with the planning board public hearing. I will call the meeting to, I want to do a roll call of the planning board members who are here, just identify themselves. I see Mr. Gotti, I see Mr. Paff. So I'll just go through a roll call, and if you could raise your hand. Mr. Paff.
Here.
Mr. McCusker.
Here.
Mr. Gotti.
Here.
Is Ms. Conant here? All right, she's not here yet. And I'm David Atkins. So tonight we are continuing our planning board public hearing. Let me just pull up my notes here. So it's a continuation of this part of the meeting is continuing our planning board public hearing that we opened on March 1st for the zoning articles. And we're here tonight to present these zoning articles that the planning board has proposed, to take your questions and comments and listen to any public comments. And at the conclusion of tonight's meeting, we will continue our public hearing to March 16th, take everything we learned tonight back to that meeting. That hearing, which you're also welcome to attend, we will continue discussion, hear additional input, make any revisions based on that feedback, and then report back a set of final recommendations for your March 29th public hearing. So now I'll hand it over to Town Planner Abby McCabe to go through and summarize the articles, and we'll be happy to take questions and comments at the end.
Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. The first planning board article is related to temporary uses and structures. The current zoning bylaw allows temporary uses and structures only by special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals in all zoning districts. This is an article that the building commissioner initially brought to our attention, that he often receives requests for certain uses and events that are very short-term, such as one-day events or events that may only last a few days or a week. An example of that would also be what we had over this last year with COVID-19, some requests to do some sidewalk sales, set up a tent and do some shopping outside, and also outdoor dining. So the building commissioner brought that to our attention, that the zoning board process is often, sometimes too cumbersome for applicants, or it's not worth them going through the process because the zoning board special permit process is about a 3-month process from beginning to end to go through preparing plans and going through the abutter notification, going through the hearing, and then there's a strict appeal period of almost a month afterwards. So the planning board is proposing an article that what you see on the screen is the existing zoning bylaw, but it allows, it adds a footnote in the section, a little footnote 12, that we have written out on the screen, that for uses that are less than 6 months, applicants can apply directly to the building commissioner for a building permit. This would allow an administrative process for applicants to file for these short-term events or uses directly to the building department. It would go through the, have to set up permit. They'd still have to submit plans and materials with hours and a description of what they need to do. And there would be an opportunity for staff distribution, and specifically the proposed language includes to the town administrator, the town planner, and the select board for comment prior to approval. But ultimately, the process may be 2 to 4 weeks time frame for the building commissioner to issue a permit rather than going through a 3-month process. The planning board also added is proposing some language that allows for up to 1 extension of no more than 6 months, so that no temporary use could ever be allowed for more than 1 year. Otherwise, an applicant would have to go through the zoning board special permit process. So the planning board at their public hearing last week on March 1st unanimously supported this article to you as written, and essentially the primary purpose is to allow an administrative review process for these shorter term uses. Do you want me to keep going through all the articles before the question?
Yeah, that would be fine, Abby.
Okay.
Thanks.
The second planning board article is relative to firearms and explosive sales and services. For those of you that were on the commission last year, this is a resubmission of the same article. This article proposes prohibiting firearms and sales in the local business A and the local business B zoning districts. Those are the commercial business districts downtown on Washington Street and High Street. The current bylaw allows firearms to be sold, after issuance of a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals, currently in the 2 local business districts, as well as the highway business and the industrial zone. However, the planning board took a look at this last year and again in this year, and realized that this type of use is not the most desirable uses that Westwood is looking for in their downtown village area districts. We're really looking to prioritize retail uses or uses that really complement each other, that draws people into the downtown to be more walkable and really generate that foot traffic. So we didn't, the planning board is proposing to not allow it, to prohibit it in the 2 local business districts, but it will continue to be allowed in the highway business and the industrial zones. The third, this is our new article, number 3, medical uses. This article has come forward a few times. The planning board has discussed this and has brought this to you. First in 2017, where it did get approval from town meeting, but ultimately it was not approved by the Attorney General due to a minor procedural defect. So the planning board has discussed this article several times, but each time the article has taken on a slightly different form. But last year, the planning board agreed to continue working on this article because they felt it was important. So in the fall, I established a working group of residents, consisted of 8 residents in town, including 2 planning board members, Chris Paff and Rob Gotti, where we worked with this working group to come forward with a revised zoning amendment proposal to bring to the full planning board in January. So that group did that. It was initially well received by the planning board. However, since we were last before you in January, we did reach out to representatives at Fox Hill Village as requested at your last meeting, and we did receive significant concern. So at the planning board's hearing last week on March 1st, the planning board kind of reevaluated and reassessed. And we're here tonight with a revised zoning proposal, different from what you saw in January. It addresses the same issues, but it's broken up now into 3 separate articles. And then a new overlay district location is proposed. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rob Gotti to go through the presentation. So I'm just going to, Rob Gotti.
Okay, I was going to say you can continue to screen share, Bab, if you want. That's fine. Let me just pull that up and let's see here. This is the one here. Okay, can you see the screen here?
Yes.
Okay, let me just put it into presentation mode here so we can maximize the screen. Okay, so this will be a little bit of a repeat from what we did on the 26th of January with you, but there are some differences towards the end. And we think it's important to be able to do this because this is a complex issue. It's got a lot of energy around it. And so we wanted to approach this in a way, because it's been, attempted to get done for 3 years, that really helps people understand what's going on. So just starting out, zoning in Westwood is really, it's here as a proactive planning tool. And there's a 3-branch system of checks and balances, not unlike the federal government, with a legislative, judicial, and executive arm. The planning board itself creates and carries out policy. We create the recommendations that we bring to you for adoption at town meeting. We also hear and rule on special permits. The zoning board of appeals, they're the judicial arm. They adjudicate any challenges to those rules. And then, the town planner and building commissioner, Abby and Joe Doyle, they're the enforcement arm enforcing the regulations and or any special permits. There's a couple of key concepts to really making this a proactive planning tool for the town. And the first is retaining control of how uses are defined and where they may locate after they're defined. And the second key concept is really around the notion of, if you fail to plan, you should plan to fail. And what do I mean by that? So if there's something that isn't defined, or there isn't a location in the table where that use may locate, that doesn't mean that use cannot locate in town. In fact, it means quite the opposite. It means it can locate anywhere in town. And this whole concept is going to be very important when we start talking about sort of post-University Station, because there were really 2 eras of medical use zoning, pre and post University Station. Before University Station, there was really only one term, and it was office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on premises. Once we put the overlay down at University Station, there were then 3 uses. There was the continuation of the office of doctor or dentist. There was then an office of healthcare professional. And finally, there was a medical center or clinic. And this medical center or clinic had with it a footnote that excluded hospitals and or substance abuse rehabilitation facilities.
Excuse me, Rob, sorry to interrupt. The slides aren't changing.
Okay. Give me 1 second. It may be a timeout thing here. Hold on. What slide do you see, Abby?
The one with the key concept number 1, to retain control.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare. Give me 1 second. Apologies, everyone. Okay. Is that slide up now?
No.
Don't see it yet. An alternative would be Abby's seemed to be working if Abby shared.
Oh, yes. Okay. How do I get back there?
I'm going to stop sharing, Ab, and you can pick it up.
Okay. All right. Can you see this?
Yeah, if you would go to, why don't you go back to just the first, no, slide 10 there. Go to slide 10.
Okay.
Okay. So as I mentioned, pre-University Station, there was that one term, the office of doctor or dentist, not resident on premise. Next slide is post-University Station. There were those 3 uses that were created: the office of doctor or dentist that carried on, then there was office of healthcare professional, and then there was medical center or clinic. And as I was mentioning, when that use was created for University Station, it specifically excluded hospital or substance abuse rehabilitation center. Now, those definitions were never put into, hold on 1 second, were never put into the definitions, nor were they in the table of where things may locate. So, but they were there as terms, as exclusions for University Station, and that will become a bit of an issue. So now if you go on to the next, so as Abby mentioned, she convened this panel, this advisory panel, and it was a really good group. We had folks from all over town representing Islington East Street, Downey, University Station, the Martha Jones Sheehan section of town, High Street and Grove Street. And we had people with a wide array of background and experience, from public safety professionals to folks in the nursing and mental health field, to commercial real estate and business and zoning folks as well. So that added to a really rich conversation as we started to attack this issue. Next slide. So what did we talk about? Well, we said, all right, let's first talk about the current definitions and where those things may locate. Then an important part of this is this notion of protected classes as defined by Mass General Law 40. As we get into the conversation, and this is what I want you to think about as you go through this, is the concepts of, do we believe we have an issue? Do we want to retain control? If the answer to both of those things is yes, then are there areas where such a use shouldn't be allowed? And then if you pull those away, what are the remaining options once those are eliminated? And are there other considerations that come into the conversation? And thereby, what are the final locations that might make sense? And that led to the recommendations that one that you heard in January, and then another based on some public input that was put forward on Monday night at our first public hearing. Next slide. So everyone's familiar. This is our base perimeter map. Now, when you go to the next slide, really our town is largely residential. And so when you look at all of the residential districts, it really doesn't leave a whole lot for the non-residential side. If you go to the next slide, that's illustrated here because this is just the non-residential districts, just the business districts. And so as we began to, the next slide is basically the creation of those mixed use overlays, which is how we've been able to do some things like for growth, such as University Station. So there are multiple mixed use overlays throughout town, mixing business and residential. So as we began to explore Mass General Law 40 and this notion of protected classes, there is a letter that we have from Special Town Council from back in, I believe it was March of 2019, that said, because Mass General Law 40A Section 3 says towns or cities shall not discriminate against a disabled person, and it is highly likely that those seeking substance abuse treatment would be ruled as a protected class, we can't just outright say, we don't want this here in town and zone it that way. So that means we have an issue that we need to be able to deal with. And so we have some undefined uses that have designated zones. The office of doctor or dentist is not defined in the definitions section of the zoning law bylaw, but the table of uses chart does specify where it is and isn't allowed. There are also, if you go to the next slide, defined uses without designated zones. There's an office of healthcare professional that is defined in the definition section, but the table of use chart doesn't specify where it can and cannot go. And then the medical center or clinic is defined in the definitions section, and it also created these two additional footnote definitions of hospital and office, substance abuse rehabilitation center. So that was where the problem came in. And so finally, you have these two, next slide, please, sorry. You have these two definitions that are neither defined in the definition section, nor are they specified in the table of uses as to where they can and cannot go, meaning that they could go anywhere. So this is the loophole that's been tried to be closed for the last 3 years. So we then started to, what we want to do with these things is clean up some definitions, consolidate office of doctor or dentist and office of a healthcare professional into a single use that is the office of a healthcare professional. We also want to expand and clearly delineate hospital and substance treatment, rehabilitation treatment facility separate and apart from the medical center or clinic, so that we can then not only have it defined, but we can actually zone it and choose where it may or may not go and under what conditions. So next slide, please. So the topics that we talked about with the group, do we agree that we want to retain control? And everyone said, yes, we agree that we have an issue and we agree we want to be able to retain control. So we said, okay, are there areas where it shouldn't be allowed? And then we got into the topics of where is left once you start to peel those away. And we all agreed that we shouldn't zone something like either of these uses in a residential district. As you saw from the other maps, that didn't leave a whole lot. So we've got just the non-residential sections. So now, Abby, if you go to the next slide. So the residential districts peeled off, and this was what we were left with. And then we literally went zone by zone and talked about whether or not something could or would, or what the issues might be around placing something there. And so as we got down to, ruling, the discussions and the pros and cons of each location, we got to our original recommendation, which was zoning medical clinics where they are currently zoned in University Station, and zoning the hospital and substance abuse treatment facility, as you'll recall back in January, at Louderbrook. And there were a bunch of things that were part of the conversations that, Abby, if you go to the next slide, that also played into how and where we chose to, eliminate things, most of which were in around the tax implications, because you have the nonprofit impact, you have some pilot agreements, and I'll let Nora talk about any of those later if you have additional questions, but those things would then potentially impact our split tax rate for the commercial residential split. So when we came to you on January 26th, one more slide ahead, Abby, we had these two zones that we were left with. And again, we put the medical clinics at University Ave. We were talking about putting the hospital and substance abuse at Louderbrook. Now, on our February 23rd meeting, Fox Hill had business before the planning board. Their business was the last piece of business before we got into our working conversations about the warrant articles. That was to be a public hearing meeting, except for the fact that the newspaper failed to run the ad, thus moving the meeting to March 1st. However, there were representatives there from Fox Hill, and Chairman Atkins had invited them to comment because they were affected by this. And so they did. And they let us know that their board had voted or had convened the night before and had significant concerns with this proposal. So before we moved from this meeting to the public hearing, we went back with the group and reconvened or re-looked at all of the different areas that we had talked about during our 8 weeks of conversation between November and December. And we went through, and I'm going to go through those things for you. If you go to the next slide, please. So we originally were going to put this at Fox Hill. And I think I've already covered this, so I'm not going to go into this too much. We went back and we reviewed a bunch of alternatives based on the feedback that we got at that meeting on the 23rd. And we talked about University Avenue. And we said, all right, those two uses, hospital and substance abuse rehabilitation facility, are currently excluded from their overlay district. And it would likely draw opposition both from, residents of the new University Station area, as well as some of those that are adjacent up in the, Pear Tree and Whitewood Drive area. And there were also tax implications that came along with this. So we went to another one. We went, I believe, next is the Purwall Walper. And again, this is one that because of its adjacent nature to the Downey School area, we figured there would be significant opposition to zoning anything here. And there were also tax implications. So we looked then over across the way at the Glacier Drive, Winslow Way. And again, you have, a neighborhood that would be abutting this that would have significant concerns. And we understood that. So we said, okay, and what could make this a little bit worse is the fractured nature of the property ownership down there that could lead to a potentially higher likelihood of development there. So this is one we ruled out. We then went and looked at Southwest Park. And this was one that we really, in the initial discussions, only ruled out for tax considerations. Then we went and looked at Allied Drive. And because in 2019, this had drawn significant concern from the neighbors in the Cherry, Carroll Ave area, because it was a direct abutting property at the East Street ARO, we thought there may be significant concerns with Allied Drive as well. And there were also tax considerations. So we went back and we revisited, if you go to the next slide, Southwest Park. And this is quite literally an island because it's bounded on all sides by highway and or rail. And there are no residents in this particular district. So we looked at this one and we said, this could be a potential solution. And so we put this one forward as the recommendation on Monday night. There was a significant alignment amongst the folks that were on the planning board advisory panel, or the planning advisory panel that Abby had convened. And so this is what we brought forward to Monday night's meeting. Now, there were residents who were concerned about this at Monday night's meeting, but that's what this public input process is all about. So we are here tonight with this as the current proposal, looking for public input, and we know that we have a continuation to our meeting on the 16th, as well as to your meeting at the end of the month before we need to finalize this. So this is part of the public input process. And going back to just the key concept of retaining control and use over this, the bounded location nature of this place, plus the special permit requirements, which are beyond our general special permit requirements, really create retained control and put some teeth into how we can control what goes in there and under what conditions things go in there. This proposed special permit, go back, Abby. The proposed special permit uses govern size and scale, traffic in terms of entrance and egress, staffing, security, lighting, hazmat disposal, and other things. So we felt like there was enough teeth in this thing and the isolated nature of it that would make this a potentially palatable solution to this, this zoning issue. So what we did is we split that original article into 3 articles that you heard Chris mention before and you heard Abby mention just recently. Article 3 cleans up the definitions and puts medical centers and clinics firmly at University Station. We then split out hospitals on their own, and we said, we're just too small, too residential a community to allow hospitals. And then Article 5 creates the new substance rehabilitation overlay district in Southwest Park, subject to significant ZBA special permit restrictions. So that's what's before you. You know, when you think about why split the article, it provides with solution with protection on multiple fronts. It gives us greater control of how and where something can go in and under what condition. It also gives, the splits the article out into 3 so that if there was a challenge and something were to be overturned, it wouldn't overturn everything. So, and it also gives voters greater choice in terms of what they want to support. So that was the rationale for splitting it into 3 articles. And that's how we are sitting here before you tonight.
Great. So before we go to questions, Abby, do you still have something to present regarding housekeeping or?
Oh, yes, let me just the last planning board article. Actually, maybe can I just touch on a little bit the details that Rob summarizes? Yep, the first medical use, Article 3 is just updating the table of use chart to the healthcare or Office of Healthcare Professional, replacing that old term Office of a Doctor or Dentist, and then adding the medical centers, prohibiting it in all zones except for in the University Ave mixed use overlay district at University Station, prohibits hospitals in all zoning districts across town, throughout town. And then it creates a new substance rehabilitation facility overlay district. So it does that by, you had in your packets the full language of that, which adds a clear definition. It updates the existing definitions to make clear what's a medical treatment center, what's a doctor, office of a healthcare professional, what's a treatment facility. And then there's a full new section of the zoning bylaw is proposed, a new 9.8 that really aims, the purpose of it is to restrict and regulate any substance abuse facilities if they were to come to town, that they could only be considered by special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals at Southwest Park, which is specifically at these 8 properties that are kind of hatched out here off of Route 1, these properties here. So here's a aerial view of that new proposed overlay district. And then the new proposed article, the new 9.8, sets clear, specific special permit criteria that the Zoning Board of Appeals would have to review if an application came forward. They would have to make clear, positive findings that there is no negative impact. So when they review the proposal as to scale and size of the project, the traffic, the access and egress, we talk about staffing levels and best practices for operation of a facility, security, public safety, and public health. They could also look at a fiscal position. And there's also a section in here about the conditions that the Zoning Board of Appeals may apply when considering such an application. And that's, they could take a careful look at and impose conditions related to noise, security, lighting. And this whole section this is new, clear criteria that the zoning board would have to look at. And as Rob mentioned, the purpose of this new section is really giving specific, ways to regulate. So if an application were to come forward, the Zoning Board of Appeals would have to make positive findings. So in their vote, and then also in a written decision, either to approve or disapprove, they would have clear legal backing to support whatever decision they make. So right now, the zoning bylaw is silent on this. So if a proposal were to come forward, the zoning does not clearly state how a zoning board or the building commissioner or a planning board, how anyone could deny it. So this is essentially the main purpose of this article, is to eliminate any ambiguity so that the town, so Westwood, could clearly zone for by regulating and restricting how all 3 of these uses, a treatment facility, a hospital, or a medical center, how and under what conditions, where they can and where they cannot be permitted in Westwood. And then the last article is a housekeeping article, which is really no substantial changes. It's just correcting some number typos that we had noticed due to eliminating an old section reference and then updating the old Board of Selectmen term to be Select Board. But myself and the planning board members are available to answer any questions.
Okay, great. So let me open this up to FinCom members first.
Scaldo.
Hi, Rob, I had a question about the ownership at Southwest Park. I think you had mentioned that a long-term, stable, non-fragmented ownership was a goal of a location. And I think you had mentioned at last week's planning board that there's 7 different owners on 8 parcels. And if I did a quick cursory review on the internet a couple of days ago, I noticed a couple of parcels actually came up for sale as listed. So can you comment a little bit about the ownership there?
One of the things, I'll actually defer to Abby and Nora on this in terms of the actual ownership. I know that when we looked at, how we could reach out to them, there were several that were held in trusts or something like that, or so it was very difficult to identify a specific person to reach out to. but I'll defer to Abby and or Nora because they were the ones making the, doing the investigation to make the outreach.
But I can answer that. So yes, there are 7 different owners of 8 different parcels. One owner owns 2 parcels. All the buildings are occupied. They all have businesses that are going concerns that are in them. We have not heard that any of them are looking to leave. But whenever you have that many different property owners, you have less control. That's probably one of the reasons why we looked first to the Longwood Louderbrook that only had 2 property owners. But yeah, so all of these properties, 7 different owners, 8 parcels of land, all in active use, all highly valued parcels of land. They're not, for those that may be listed for sale, they are not going for cheap, put it that way. But that's always a factor. So whenever you have a zone that has multiple owners, that's an issue. We had said the same thing about Allied Drive, and we said the same thing about Glacier Drive, that they're multiple properties with different owners.
So I guess in your kind of analysis of Southwest versus Louderbrook, Longwood, how do you weigh those factors and decide that Southwest is the better location?
So we were looking at it and really saying that while it is adjacent and relatively near as the crow flies, because of that bounded nature, right? You've got, the highways on either side, and then you've got roughly a 15-foot berm up to the train tracks that separates that park from the neighborhood. We felt like this is the one with some additional enhancements in terms of fencing and other things like that could really provide the greatest isolated use. So that was why we were looking at that as a potential solution. Again, we're exploring options here. We have, consensus that there is an issue that needs to be dealt with. We have consensus that we want to retain control. We have consensus that we don't want it located in a residential neighborhood. It's impossible given, the way that our commercial real estate works to not have it be adjacent to someone. So we wanted to be able to have the greatest impact in terms of protecting the most number of people and have the greatest teeth to have protect those who are nearest to wherever we land. And so that was the discussion that we had. That was the way we approached it. And we landed here as a possibility. And part of this whole process is receiving questions like this from both the FinCom and the community. And, there are options. But ultimately, we have to do our job to close this loophole to protect the town.
Kate Wynn?
Okay.
Thanks.
Go.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I just wanted to highlight that, years ago, I appreciate everything the planning board has done on this subject. And years ago, Howard Messing had written a letter when Meditech was one of the proposed sites for this, and to let people know that his business was ongoing, that he intended to continue to occupy his property with his business. And the surrounding residents were not satisfied with that assurance from him, so that there wouldn't be a change in ownership. So I just wanted to highlight that. I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying, but
he actually appeared at the last hearing and reiterated that as well. And so, that was, on the record with the meeting, but that's less relevant in this particular location.
No, sorry, understood. I just wanted to say that the barriers that we come up against as the planning board has looked at different locations to choose, because we kind of are forced to choose somewhere. The barriers to finding a perfect solution just keep shifting as you look at the different properties. So I appreciate the work that you've done. I'm comfortable with this, with the analysis that has been done by the planning board over the years. And I just want to say thank you for the work.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Can I jump in?
Go ahead.
Couple of questions. I don't know who wants to start off, but what was Fox Hill's primary concern that caused you to change the location?
So there was feedback from them that they were opposed to both the hospital, which was their initial primary concern, but there was almost equal weighted concern for the zoning of a substance abuse facility there. Again, we felt that initially that was a comfortable place to be able to do that based on the fact that, one of the folks on the committee or on the advisory panel was in commercial real estate. And he said, nobody's going to look to come in and take over an office building to convert it into a substance abuse facility because it's going to be too expensive to convert. They would look for something like Fox Hill that would be a much easier conversion given the number of, residences and that type of thing and the medical facilities within. So that would be something that would be an easy convert, but that would only happen if Fox Hill was going to sell. So that was not something that we thought was likely. So that was why we started there. We got, word that there was going to be significant pushback, and several folks showed to the public hearing on March 1st. And, we had an alternative in play for Southwest Park that we thought was a similarly viable location that we could mitigate the impact on the abutting neighborhood as opposed to one that was right essentially in, because there are residences within that Louderbrook Drive. So that was why we chose to make the switch after continuing to have conversations with those that were involved in the plan, in the advisory plan.
Did they have a concrete concern or just a general concern, we don't want it in our backyard?
I think it's probably more the latter, right? I mean, they didn't have a concrete concern about anything because there was nothing to have a concrete concern about, because there isn't anybody who is, proposing going here. We are zoning protectively to maintain that control.
And I think this change of location is a drastic change from the initial warrant article that we started with 2 months ago. Is the same opportunity to meet with the owners of South Park and just have discussion with them going to be made available to them?
It wasn't as much a concern about the ownership of Southwest Park as it was the residences that were within the zone, right? So yes, we had assurances from both owners that they were not going to sell, but ultimately it's the concern of the residents. So this public hearing process from March 1st straight through to the end of the month, there is opportunity for feedback, and we can look at all their alternatives.
But not so much the ownership. What about the businesses that are there? Are they going to be afforded the opportunity? Are they going to be notified directly that this is proposed in their backyard? Is it true that there's a daycare center in the Southwest Park that's going to be affected?
There is not yet. There is one that is planned for going into the church, and the only reason we knew about it was because they had come to us with respect to, I believe it was a playground that they were putting in.
Okay, so does this cause any concerns going forward for putting a substance abuse facility next to a daycare center or vice versa?
We are not putting it there. We're zoning it there, and in the event that it, we're trying to put as much teeth into it to be able to protect the community as best we can. That's.
Can you zone it out of existence? And not, can you?
That's where the protection zoned comes in. That's what makes it difficult.
Okay. I mean, you had said that it's highly likely that would be required to have a substance abuse zone in town. And you referred to the 2019 letter by the town attorney at that time. I don't recall that letter, but is there any definitive law or statute or anything that's come down since that letter that says every town has to have a substance abuse zone? I don't think disabilities rise to the same level of protection of First Amendment rights like every town needs.
I don't think there was a requirement that every town zone for it. I think it was that by zoning for it, you would specify where it could be. But if you don't zone for it, then it could be anywhere.
And specifically, what makes us unique in this situation is that because those things were excluded from the overlay district in University Station, we effectively created the definitions, which opened Pandora's box on this. To your question about any specific rulings or anything like that, I'll defer to Mr. Ahern, because this letter, I believe Pat has reviewed as well. So.
Yeah, Dan Bailey, Special Town Council, wrote a memo to the planning board. The planning board voted to release that letter at their last memo, excuse me, at their last meeting. I would encourage you to try and get a copy of it. It basically says that in Massachusetts, you cannot prohibitively zone against substance abuse facility. You can't say, I don't want a substance abuse facility in my community.
And that's Massachusetts statute?
Well, I think it's case law.
Case law?
Statute. Yeah, I don't have the memo in front of me, but I looked at it, I reviewed it, and I looked for case law that says it wasn't good law and could not find it. So it's a lot like, I hate to use this analogy, but I will. It's a lot like years ago, the adult uses. Some towns like Norwood tried to prohibit adult zoning districts completely, and they almost, and Dedham did the same thing, and they had some come into areas where they didn't want them. So you cannot prohibitively zone against substance abuse facilities within a town. You can proactively zone for them where you want them. That doesn't mean they're coming in.
Mr. Ahern, Peter, may I jump in for a minute, please?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to try to probably misinterpret, but I want to interpret what Jim may be trying to say is that I don't think we're trying to, or anybody's saying not to allow it or permit it for the town, but perhaps in the same zone right next to a daycare may not be the best spot for it. Maybe zone it someplace, I'm going to shoot from the hip, an industrial park like University Station, zone for it someplace there where maybe we reduce a future exposure of a bad situation that happens, off the cuff on a one-off.
Understood, but what I don't want you to leave the meeting thinking you can prohibit them.
I totally understand. You can't prohibit it from the town. We just maybe prohibit it from being right next to a school or a daycare where there are very young children.
So I'm familiar with the constitutional requirements of adult districts, et cetera. You can't prohibit it, but you can make it, I don't want to say, you can't make it impossible, but you can make it impractical.
Challenging?
What do you mean challenging?
You mean make it challenging for them to fit in?
Correct.
Yeah.
Are we in that same situation with the substance abuse?
It's similar. It's similar.
So are you saying that disability, the requirement for the disability of the substance abuse, the disability angle for substance abuse rises to the same level of a constitutional?
No, I'm not saying it rises to a First Amendment protection, but there's still a protected class.
All right, thank you.
Let me just jump in.
Two people, yeah, go first, Mike, and then Abby has a point that she wants to make, but go ahead, Mike.
Rob, appreciate the detailed explanation you have and all the hard work that was put into this clearly. But let me just try to bring some things together so that I'm clear in my understanding of what we're actually talking about here. This particular site, there's no available facility. You've spoken to the people that own the properties here and they're in no position or currently have no desire to do anything with their current real estate holdings, correct?
Mike, I don't want to represent that I have spoken with any of the business owners or property owners regarding this myself. And that was what Abby was, or Nora was referring to before when she said there were, multiple businesses that were in real estate trusts, I believe, where it was difficult to identify any specific person to talk to prior to our March 1st meeting.
Okay.
Right. If I could just clarify, we have not spoken to the business owners or the property owners in Southwest Park yet about their intentions for their properties.
Okay. All right, let's just speculate, or let's just suppose one of those sites became available, was out on the market. What would I, if I'm representing or trying to put a substance abuse site there, what would I have to do to get the town's approval to do it? Understanding that this has been approved as the, this has been zoned for it. What would I have to do?
You would have to apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit, and you would have to establish, by going through all of the criteria that are in this proposed regulation, that you had no negative effect on the surrounding neighborhood, that you met all the security claims, concerns, lighting concerns, architectural concerns, traffic concerns, that there was no negative effect coming from your proposed facility due to the way it was operating and the way it was going to be built. That's a pretty high hurdle. It's a more intensive special permit process than we have for other special permit uses in our bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
There was, excuse me, there was some discussion in the last planning meeting about potential setbacks. And I know, Nora, you were kind of doing some calculations on the fly. Could either Nora or Abby comment on, are there any concerns regarding existing setbacks that would take away some of the ability, one, for this to happen at Southwest Park, and two, to the extent there are some, would that make it look like this is overly legislated, or the right, whatever the right word is, that it's really not a place that does allow substance of facilities?
So if I could answer that, the way we've crafted the special permit thus far, it does not add additional setback requirements over and above those that are in the underlying zone. So if you look at Southwest Park now, those buildings are built more or less to the existing zoning requirements with the setbacks. All of them could be closer to the edges of their property than they are, but they're developed in a reasonable manner because the buildings have to have parking associated with them. So they're all built very similar. 8 different properties, 7 different buildings, and they have similar configurations to fit on the land. If a substance rehabilitation treatment facility wanted to go there, they would not only have to meet the current setback requirements of the Highway Business District, but they would have to show the Zoning Board of Appeals that they could do so and still create a facility that was safe, attractive, and had no negative effect on any of the surrounding properties. The question that came up about the existence of a daycare facility and a church that the daycare facility operates in, 2 leased uses in the space, which could come, could go. If those uses are there at the time that an applicant applies for a substance rehabilitation treatment facility, now the zoning board is looking at the relationship between the proposed facility and those uses that may be considered by the zoning board at that time to be uses that are less than compatible. So they would look at it on a case-by-case basis. I also want to point out that no matter where you zone in town, whatever section you choose that you think is appropriate for this use, that becomes a special permit use, someday when someone applies for a use there could very well be a child care facility or a church or a school at that location, because those uses are not dictated by zoning. Child care facilities, churches, and schools can go anywhere in any commercial zone, in any residential zone, on any property they choose to, anywhere in any town in Massachusetts. So I just want to make it clear that we're not trying to put 2 uses together. That's just a use that we can't determine whether it would be somewhere or it won't be somewhere. It's an application. When it comes in, we have no choice but to approve it. So whatever zone you choose, you're talking about making that zone a potential place where a substance rehabilitation facility could apply for a special permit. May or may not ever do that, but you're making that the place that you choose, that would be the only location in town where they could apply. There's no telling what that location will look like 20, 30, 50 years from now if an application does come in.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, Chris Paff of the Planning Board, I just had one thing that jumped to mind as we were looking at the map there. I think it's no longer, University Ave is no longer the place to call. Let's just put it there. University Ave, while it is not zoned residential, is a neighborhood for over 300 apartments and 100 condominiums. And as we found at Fox Hill Village, it's not zoned residential, but there are over 400 residents of Westwood living in that area. So to represent and say, let's just stick it there so it's not near a daycare center, well, you are now putting it next to residents in town. And just because they pay rent doesn't mean they're not residents of our town. And there are additionally 100 condos in University Ave. So I've heard it, there is no perfect place in our town, but the advisory panel working on this has deemed that this particular area, and given the island characteristics that it has the least negative effect to any abutting residents in our town. It was pointed out Glacier Drive has Willard Circle, and Walper Purwall area has Putting Drive and the Downey School immediately adjacent to it. I challenge anybody in this town to locate an area other than this one that we've talked about that has the same physical barriers to our residents. We're not trying to attract this as a use. We're trying to protect our town.
So
And
Chris,
I think it's important to remember
if I
that.
could sort of build on what you're saying, right? So this one has more physical barriers. On Thursday, I got a call from Michael Walsh. He asked, some questions related to some of the places that we considered. And one of the places that we talked about was Allied Drive. And so, looking at Allied Drive, it's across the circle from where, the other Meditech facility is. And it's roughly the same acreage as what Southwest Park is. It basically impacts the same neighborhood. So the question and the other piece of information that is relevant is that Dedham has zoned their substance abuse treatment facility overlay district on Allied Drive up to the Westwood border. So there is an alternative, and quite frankly, it'd be interesting to hear public input tonight, because if you've got two places that you could choose from that both are within proximate distance of that neighborhood, there may be a solution that one is better than the other for those residents. Because as we've said all along, there's no place that you can do this that isn't somewhat adjacent to residences. So that's what the public input process is all about. So there are options, not many, but that's one that is relatively safe. And oh, by the way, the neighbor has already zoned it for that. So there's in theory, a solution that, puts it in the same places where it could already go just over the town line.
Thank you. A separate clarifying point for those folks and we will get to questions eventually here that are typing in questions, please type in your name, your full name, and your Westwood address so that we have that, just like we would do at any public hearing. So sorry, I didn't clarify that better at the outset. So, okay. Who else from FinCom would like to speak?
Can I jump back in?
Yes.
Rob, what's the feasibility? Has anyone had any discussions with our neighbor in Dedham about making that a joint zoned area for substance abuse?
I don't know that I would defer to Pat on whether or not that's a joint substance abuse. What you do look at is there are 3 existing uses on the land that is sort of, it crosses the border, right? You've got the juvenile court, you've got the Hilton over there, and I believe the Beth Israel Center may cross into our town a little bit. So there's roughly there, I think we said there was about 12.5 or 12.7 acres there, and I believe it's 13.2 at Southwest Park. So it's roughly the same acreage, and would be, again, there are things that are not planning to go anywhere anytime soon in terms of those 3 uses that could make it viable. And oh, by the way, even if we were to zone this at Louderbrook, the reality is if Dedham has already zoned it there, that something could come and be basically as close, if it ever went there, as if we had zoned it there ourselves. So
Well, I was
that's,
just looking, yeah, the map that you described, you couldn't really tell how large it was. So is it 12 acres of all those little parcels along 128? I mean, are they individually buildable or not?
I don't know if they're individually buildable. The total acreage of all of that area comes up to like 12.5 or 12.7. I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head. It's
Yeah, I
close.
don't think there's no available acreage. It's all developed.
So that it's not an option because it's not possible to build there.
It's no
Oh,
different than Southwest
It's
Park
just
is.
like Louderbrook. It's already developed. They'd have to
Okay.
make significant changes to put something there.
So what we're talking with any of these locations is putting an overlay district in to basically specify this, so that we have now zoned for it and we've been able to protect ourselves with it. And, you know, the developed land is the same in all three locations. There are businesses that are there, and it would only be if those businesses were to sell that you would have the possibility of something coming in.
And just one more follow-up. Can you limit the number of substance abuse facilities? In other words, like in over in South Park, you have 8 parcels. You don't want to have 8 different substance abuse centers. You have limited to 1 per zoning area.
I would defer to Mr. Ahern, but given the protective class, it seems counterintuitive that you would be able to limit how many.
Yeah, you'd be limited by what you could do there through your zoning, but not like a set number. We've got 1, we're done. I don't think you could do that.
Any more questions and comments from FinCom folks?
Yeah, Peter, one quick question.
Yes.
So Chris, I know you mentioned that University Station obviously is it's retail as well as residential, and I certainly get that. Is it all zoned the same with that restriction of no substance abuse use building in that area, or is that a changeable possibility where certain sections could be open for that?
I believe in the overlay district, it would be disallowed. But in the farther down the road, as you get more into the commercial district, closer to Canton Street side, you would leave the overlay district, and then that would be an area. But that's one of the few commercial areas in town that we would like to develop and continue adding to our tax base. In all of these substance abuse facilities they're nonprofit. And so we would just putting it there, we'd be hurting a very large possible opportunity to develop, which may add to our tax base in the future. And its physical proximity to, as I mentioned, over 300 or 400 residents just down the street, even though it leaves the zone as you get closer to Canton Street.
Right. And if I could just respond, and right now the proposal is to only allow the substance treatment centers at Southwest Park, and only medical centers or clinics at University Station under the overlay district. So that's the University Ave mixed use overlay, consistent with the agreements we already have in place with the master developer for University Station.
So to summarize, if nothing happens, then each of these areas that are technically possibly eligible, if they were to get ZBA approval, could be a site that somebody tries to develop a clinic on.
Yeah, if we don't zone, yeah.
If we do, right, if we do nothing, because each of
It's
these
subject
sites,
to it,
they
except
have
for
the
University
same.
University Overlay District, which, right, Nora?
But it wouldn't be restricted to just these commercial areas.
No, they could go anywhere.
Right. I think the only place in town that you would have a good chance of winning a suit against one would be at University Station, because it's specifically prohibited there.
Right. Which, as Rob mentioned before, is kind of opened the door as to, all right, we touched on the subject. Now we have to circle back and close the loop on this whole thing.
So then the problem is if you end up landing on one of these spots, that's where the target is then painted for that target. And so everybody else that's not in that backyard is fine, but the people that are in that backyard, now they feel as though they have that target painted because the target is painted.
And that's where the special permit conditions come into play. And that's where you want to build a very healthy, robust special permit process that takes the neighborhood into consideration.
And those teeth, that's stronger teeth than exist today in a sort of a generic ZBA
Yes, it is.
application.
Yes.
In addition to the ZBA special permit, it also would have to pass a site plan review from the planning board. So it would go before two boards for ultimate approval. It would not be an easy process. We're just trying to identify a location, and we feel that this is the best in our town. It's not great. It's not the ideal spot, but we believe in maintaining our control. This is the spot that least affects our residents. And, you know, we talked about Allied Drive and why wasn't it included? It could be included. We thought at a deference to those residents who spoke up a couple of years ago when the Meditech near the Rotary was considered. It was just, there's sidewalks right across the Rotary. So we decided, okay, let's not do that, because those same neighbors may find objection to that location. But the Southwest Park looked to be answering just about all the concerns. We still had tax issues, but we're going to have that anyway.
I mean, I went down there yesterday, and I mean, I get that as the crow flies, it is really close, and there are some physical limitations to getting there. You know, I can see why, given the proximity of the Meditech facility that literally is, you know, a fence line away, and people from that building walk in that neighborhood at lunchtime when non-COVID times. So I can understand the concern that existed for the East Street ARO back 2 years ago. The Southwest Park, we tried to, you know, identify a place that was literally an island. Quite frankly, if we don't do it there, if there was, you know, support for doing it over on Allied, we have to do something. I think, you know, the question you have to ask yourself is, do you agree that we have exposure? Do we want to retain control? And it shouldn't be in residential neighborhoods. If you basically agree on those three things, then it's a matter of where and how best. And so that's what we're trying to create the options for, and that's what we're trying to zone for on a protective basis.
Rod, the thing I would end on would be, given that info about Dedham and their possible plan for Allied Drive, which I didn't know about until tonight, that might be worth pursuing and trying to find out more about that, because if that's the case, I mean, that might be two birds with one stone type of deal, because you know, if you play it out, you may end up with one in Southwest Park and Allied Drive across the street.
That logic holds, Tommy. That could happen, absolutely.
See, even with a neck brace, there's logic there. I gotta go tell my family that. All right, thanks, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else from FinCom before we open this up to the public? Not seeing anything. Jane, I think there was someone that in advance of the meeting asked if they could speak regarding one of the planning board articles. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I see the person here, but they haven't raised their hand.
They have I believe it's the same person that provided a question. So
Let me take a look, Peter.
it's near the end of the question.
Yes.
So they provided their address and.
Yes. Where am I? So Mr. Kamenker, is it Kamenker? Brian Kamenker, would you like to would you like me to read the question or would you like to address the group? You had asked to speak prior to this evening. You want to unmute him, Connor?
He should be able to unmute himself right now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Here you go.
This was on the
Could you just
issue on the,
could you just give us your name and address, please, sir?
oh, yes, my name is Brian Kamenker. I live at 95 University Avenue, apartment 2407. I actually came to speak about the other issue that you haven't talked about, the firearms and explosives store. Is that something that you're about to deal with, or should I talk about that now?
Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm the chairman of the Westwood Republican Town Committee, and many of our members own firearms. And in fact, I think you'd be surprised at the number of people in Westwood who own guns. And I think if you were to consult the Westwood Police Department, I think you'd find, in fact, I know that you'd find that the waiting list for a firearms permit is months in advance. And it's been that way for quite a while. So firearms are pretty popular in town, although it's, maybe you may not be aware of that. And I was very concerned about this sudden, thing to restrict a firearm, a gun shop in the business areas. That they might have, negative aspects or not desirable or something like that. I mean, first of all, I'm also confused that they mix firearms and explosives. I mean, explosives I've always understood were something that construction companies used, but a gun shop, I don't know if they sell explosives, but anyway, gun shops, I mean, it would be nice to have a gun shop here and not have to go to Dedham or Norwood or something. And they're just retail stores. And I think that the optics of this whole thing, given the, what's going on in the federal government with this move to restrict firearms nationally is very troubling. And I think that if this is brought up in the town meeting, it will attract a lot of attention among firearms owners here in Dedham who are opposed to this and don't see any reason to restrict a firearms shop or a gun shop. So I'm just saying that it's something that people are very, very concerned about, that I've talked to, and are frankly scared as where it might lead. And I realize that yes, you could have it on Route 1 or you could have it on University Avenue, but why not have a gun shop in just a regular business district? So that's what I came to say, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Anyone from the planning board or want to respond? Or
I would just emphasize that we looked at it more as promoting other types of uses in the village centers, so that we would not lose the option for other types of businesses and things that promote walking and families and all. I mean, I know you might want to take your son down to the gun shop and all, but we figured that the other uses, we wanted to keep those more prioritized for the downtown High Street and Islington Center, and that we have a gun shop on University already, and that was a better location for those kinds of uses.
okay, Jane, I think we could start to read those questions.
Do you want to start with the Q&As first before we take?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael Dewan has asked, says he has a question regarding scale of the property size, but he would actually like to be acknowledged if we could bring him on. Michael Dewan, if Connor, you could bring him on.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, please just give your name and address.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, Michael Dewan at 167 Carroll Avenue. Thank you so much. Hey, I'm not saying this as cliche before I get going here, but I do appreciate where you're all coming from, the amount of time you spent trying to fix this or review things. When we get on these, when we get on the topic of this, there's a lot of kind of justification as to all the work and thought that went into it, which of course is appreciated. You're trying to show that you're not, you know, making some fly-by-night decision. And I think everyone pretty much understands why this is, you know, such an important thing to so many people. But you're not dumbing it down enough so that other people can potentially help identify potential loopholes. And forgive me, I'm not being critical. If I could offer just a suggestion, you have a perception problem right now. And the perception problem is when this is rolled out to people and there's a lot of and we're trying to do this, that creates doubt. When it seems that the last reason it wasn't put into place was because of a technicality, that creates doubt. And there's an argument being used that it's not applicable to one side of things, but it's applicable to something else. We don't want to put it in a very small specific area on University Avenue because the tax base potential, but you're not quantifying that hit. So it's hypothetical. The tax base, that sounds big. What's the ramification? Because people want to weigh that against the decision. What tax implications are we discussing? Is that worth putting it there? We talk about if we put it over the area we're looking at, the island you've identified, which again, completely makes sense why you're pulling that out. But if we look at this island we're talking about, well, it wouldn't be an easy process to put something there. Well, then why can't it be an easy process if I put it over in the completely industrial section and define a very small 5 or 6 parcels on University? So we're scared to put it on University because of the tax implications, but why can't that just be just as hard of a process to get approved? At the end of the day, it's as simple as this. And again, please understand, I appreciate where you're coming from. If you put it near where anybody's living, it's going to be a problem. So tax base be damned, don't put it where there's homes. And you're absolutely right. There's people living in University City now. There's condos, there's apartments, there's retirement communities. There's probably going to be more. Get it away from those people. We also don't want it near people going into Wegmans and Target and shopping and that kind of thing. So get it away from there. Don't put it as the crow flies 15 yards from a school or a neighborhood or something like that. If you have to do it and you talk about we can put fences up and we can take these precautions, bring those forward in the proposal. Hey, we're putting it here. We're going to put this investment into the fences. We're going to put this high of fences up. We're going to block this off. Now people have an idea because again, you're dealing with the perception issue and a lack of trust because of what happened with certain things with the Islington project. Beautiful project. As we all know, it's not going 100% to plan. None of these things do. Which is why you got to have counter things and backups and that kind of thing in case it goes to hell. So the only way this works where no one's going nuts is if you don't put it near a school, you don't put it near a daycare center. By the way, what do those two things have in common? It's not near kids. People will pay more taxes if there's not a drug treatment facility near their effing kids. So thank you. I'm sorry for the impassioned thing, but I feel like we're going around and around here.
So Michael, I mean, I understand it. I totally get it. And this is there, as Chris said earlier, there's not a perfect answer to any of it.
I totally agree with you.
And so, you know, trying to find solutions is what we're trying to do. And that's why this public input process is so important, right? Because essentially, if everybody agrees on the first three questions at hand, then it becomes a matter of where and how best. And so if there is a better solution, that we can get everybody on board with, then that's a wonderful thing, but there is just, there's not a perfect answer, and these are difficult conversations. And so, we have to be willing to have those. And I appreciate the fact that you're bringing it up and challenging. And that's what we need to be able to do in order to get to a place where we can get to the best collective decision that affords the greatest protection for the most number of residents.
Robert, forgive my ignorance, and someone brought this up before, and outside of the quote unquote threat of the tax basis, again, forgive my ignorance. If you were to move past Canton into the industrial area, and if you identified 4 or 5 parcels there currently being occupied, one by Meditech, oh no, excuse me, they redid that building, forgive me. One by Spectrum Courts, where that hot dog, where that guy runs that hot dog stand out of that trailer. If you the shipping area right around there.
Michael, that area is the town of Norwood.
Yeah.
It is? Okay, forgive me, thank you. So the cutoff there is what, Canton?
Yes. Okay.
So really then, so anything beyond Canton's out of the question, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that. That helps clarify a lot for a lot of people. Okay, so anywhere else, to your point, anywhere else, it's somebody saying, I don't want it in my backyard, put it in someone else's backyard, correct?
There's never been a more NIMBY issue than this, right?
So if that's the case, then I think what people would appreciate, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think people would appreciate is instead of the threat of we have to put this somewhere, or it's going to go someone could open a home next door to you. It would be a completed plan. So here's the island we've identified. If this, then that. So fences, whatever else, or Allied Drive. Completely understand what you're saying before. The assumption is it's on the other side of the freeway. That's an assumption. I don't want to speak for everyone that lives in Carroll Avenue or in this neighborhood. The nice thing about that is somebody gets off the freeway, they get back on the freeway. Seems pretty easy. But everything is proposed as a take it or leave it. And as I said,
well, no, it's not.
No, I'm sorry. Forgive me. You're right. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I apologize.
You're asking questions to clarify.
The perception is, again, there's a lack of trust in the community because of certain things. I would ask you to please consider how can we rebuild that trust with a complete plan, and don't use one thing to justify one thing and it holds all over. And so again, I appreciate what you're saying and what you're doing, but it seems that again, the Allied Drive thing is the only thing on the table that's not near where anyone lives, correct?
I mean, there are very few residences over there, but there are residences over there.
Yes. Westwood Terrace is a neighborhood on that side of the Rotary.
And forgive me, this is something you mentioned, forgive my ignorance again. What was the issue with the Meditech building off of 109 by Heritage Finance, the one in that little cul-de-sac?
The issue that came up at our first meeting a couple of weeks ago was the Fox Hill residents voiced strong opposition, and there's 400 people in town that basically implicated that they would vote against it. And that's ultimately, as we said before, this is not just tax. Every other location was essentially discarded, including the Lauterbrook area, the Meditech on 109, due to its proximity to residents. Every single one has been discarded, but for the Southwest Park and potentially Allied Drive. But as we've indicated, we didn't bring up Allied Drive because its proximity to the Cherry Street neighborhood and there is Westwood Terrace over on that side of the Rotary. Without town approval, nothing gets done here. So we would be fools to come up with something that we know 400 people are going to vote against at town meeting.
I understand. That makes perfect sense.
So,
And
so
Michael,
this
if I can just,
excuse me, this is Peter. I think I really do appreciate, Mike, all your comments and everything. We do have people in line in the
I
queue.
understand.
And
Just Peter, one last thing, because I think people are still confused about this, to avoid having to answer the same question. Why can't it be Yale Street or Dartmouth Street? So, like, yeah, I mean, so it's not. I know there's residents in University Center, but that's.
Well,
I
as
guess
you earlier you mentioned, don't put it near Wegmans, don't put it near Target.
so that's why. Okay.
That's where our people shop. We're trying to be sensitive to residents here. We're not trying to jam it down anyone's throat, but we're in a tight wire, act here, trying to figure out how to solve this Rubik's Cube. It's not easy in this town because of the nature. We're a bedroom community.
Yep.
Okay. So as I said, I'd like to move on. Jane, if you can read some of the questions, because we have other folks in line. I don't want to good points and good discussion, but I don't want to monopolize it on one and not get to the others.
Barbara Clark from Fox Hill Village would like to be acknowledged. Barbara,
That's
please
fine.
state your name and address.
Yes, my name is Barbara Clark. I live at Fox Hill Village, 10 Longwood Drive, apartment 271. I don't know if people are aware, but we are a cooperative community. We own shares of stock, which give us the right to the apartments that we live in. And I think I said at the last meeting, our average age at entrance is about 81. Most of our residents are in their 80s and older. People walk when they can. They have gardens that they tend to when they can. I think our residents are fearful. And I know this sounds like not in my backyard. I'm sorry to be part of this, because I know the town has an issue and we support the town. However, as part of a life plan community, you may not know that life plan communities have suffered over the last year with elderly people afraid to go out, afraid to look at communities like ours, because many have shut down in terms of visitors. It's hard to sell apartments. To the extent that we had another issue, like the potential to have a substance abuse clinic in our zone, that would create another major impediment, another major potential issue. And the communities that we compete with for these elderly residents would make a great deal of hay over this. So we are hopeful that a good solution can be found. I expect that the town of Westwood, as most societies do, have cherished their elders. And just as you care about children who may be in a preschool someday at Southwest Park, we currently have 400 elderly people living at 10 Longwood Drive. So thank you for listening to us. And we hope, again, we support the town and we hope that there is a successful solution.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Jane, can I just ask a question? I don't know how to raise my hand on this thing.
Okay, Debbie, can we just get quickly through the other questions and then we'll get to you? We said
Sure, but it had to do with a question one of the residents asked, so I wanted clarification from Chris on what he said for an answer.
Okay, go ahead, Debbie.
So the gentleman that just spoke said that he asked about if there were any neighborhoods near LI Drive. And Chris, I think you said Cherry Street, but that's
Cherry Street is across the Rotary next to the track.
it's pretty four lanes across the highway, correct? Is that right? I'm just trying to get the location correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Jane. And we'll ask folks to be, if we open it up and not just read their questions, we ask folks to be brief because we do have the school committee on and waiting for us.
Hi, Fran Fusco. Go ahead, Fran, please state your name and address.
Fran, are you unmuted? We don't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane. And my question is, I mean, this subject has been going on for 3 years. And I've never heard any decisive decision asked to an unbiased outside counsel on whether we should be zoning for this or not. So I'm just wondering why we haven't, and don't we think it would be a good idea to do so?
Peter, I'll answer that question.
Go ahead, Pat.
2 years ago, or 2019, we've got a memo from Dan Bailey, who's as fine a land use attorney as you'll find in the Commonwealth. That's still good law. I reviewed it this spring. I looked for cases that disagreed with it, couldn't find any. The tenant of Dan's memo basically said you can't prohibitively zone against substance abuse facilities. So the answer to your question, Ms. Fusco, is we have a good opinion from a very good zoning lawyer. I don't think it's a good use of tax dollars to pay for it a second time.
Thank you, Jane. Anything else in the queue?
We have Jamie Allen. Jamie, please go ahead. State your name and address.
Okay, so you can hear me now. I'm Jamie Allen over at 530 Pond Street. I've actually lived in Westwood 28 years. Wow. So I wanted to talk about Article 3. I will agree that honestly, I don't really want to sell explosives in our town. But in terms of selling firearms and ammunition, we do have a Westwood Gun Club. We do have many members of the town, citizens in the town that own guns. And as I'm sure that many of you know, that they make the best neighbors. There's a very extensive background check to be able to get a license to carry, and it does take months. And so I would like to say that your neighbors that have firearms, they're your safest neighbors. And I believe they would make your safest business owners and clients. Also, in terms of these type of stores, of course, children 18 and under are not allowed in them, or I'll say under 18, without an adult. So it just strikes me that this seems like a backdoor way to oppose our Second Amendment, which says that we should not have our right to bear arms should not be infringed. Because imagine if 90% of the towns in Massachusetts decided to start limiting with their zoning. And I'm just thinking, we're going to have to drive 3 hours out to Western Mass to get buy a gun or ammunition so that we could shoot over here at the Westwood Gun Club. And I was just going to say that the Second Amendment is just as important as our First Amendment. And when we start zoning areas of free speech in Westwood, I just think you're taking a big step here. Doesn't say anything in the Constitution about a lot of issues, but the first and the second are pretty important. And I think we should take note. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Jamie. We have one more, I believe Skip Wells raised a hand, and we'll just cut this off after Skip and go on to the next presentation.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I appreciate all you guys on the FinCom. 50 years ago, I was chairman of the FinCom. But could somebody speak to Allied Drive, that possibility? I lived on Salisbury Drive for 51 years, and I'm now a resident of 10 Longwood Drive, own my home here. But if Dedham has already zoned a spot next to our town line, there's nothing magic about a town line. All the bad things you fear, the town line doesn't mean anything to a bad guy. Wouldn't it make sense to combine all of this into basically one unit where ours would abut theirs? Could somebody address that?
That's something that is a possibility. I mean, there is certainly similar size acreage there. And given that that exists, and I think Tom Kilgariff pointed this out before as well, even if we ended up zoning it all the way across town, you could end up with something right on the line. And to your point, Skip, lines don't mean anything other than they exist on a map. So yes, there could be something that is a solution to this, and we could bring this 3-year ordeal to an end and protect the town. So it's about exploring options and about finding solutions. And so, I think the points you make are fair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I really want to thank all the presenters in the for this planning board section.
Thank you, Peter. Before we move on, the planning board needs to make a motion to continue.
Yes, sorry, I forgot this was also your meeting.
I'll make a motion that we continue this hearing to our March 16th meeting on 7 p.m. via Zoom.
Second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. We'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Paff?
Yes.
Mr. McCusker?
Yes.
Ms. Conant? I think that was a yes. Yes. Can you just raise?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And Mr. Gotti?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So the planning board's public hearing is continued to our next meeting on March 16th at 7 p.m. on Zoom.
Thanks for all your input. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we're on to the school committee warrant article. So I'll leave this, I believe probably Emily, will you be presenting?
Yes. Hello,
Oh.
good evening, everyone.
Let me
May I-
apologize.
Yeah.
Let me apologize, Emily, for the lateness of that. Obviously, your warrant article is extremely important, but the ones before this were pretty important and had a lot of reaction in the town. And so we just wanted to make sure that folks were heard.
I understand. I think Carol Lewis is on as well. I don't know if Connor could promote her to panelist.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, she's on already. Okay,
I
great.
am. Thank you, Emily. Thanks, Connor.
All right.
Good
Thanks.
evening, everybody.
All right, so good evening. I'm actually gonna first share my screen and I will turn it over to Maya, who's gonna talk about what our plan is for the presentation. Let me share.
Great. Thanks, Emily.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having us today. As you know, we are here for a warrant article requesting bridge funding for this project. And we are certainly going to address the bridge funding in this presentation, but we thought we would actually provide a soup to nuts presentation of the project for everybody at this hearing. So our plan is to start off with where we are and give everyone sort of a quick peek at the current project. Then we're going to go back to the beginning with a little bit of history around the Hanlon and the Deerfield schools and why we initiated this project. We'll move into the selection process, going through the evaluation criteria and the decision-making matrix of how we got to this particular project. And finally, we'll get into the estimated cost, of the project and the ultimate impact to the town residents and the specifics of the bridge funding for this warrant article. So just a reminder, this is a project for the consolidation of the Hanlon and the Deerfield schools to be built on the existing Hanlon site for a maximum capacity of 560 students. For this project, we've drawn inspiration from the woods surrounding the property and the plan to incorporate that inspiration into both the exterior and interior of the building. These are some slides of the current project. This is a view of the entrance a little bit further back along a walkway. And then I think if you go to the next one, this is a view of the project from Gay Street with the soccer fields right in front. And finally, we just wanted to highlight that we really see this as a school for the community. There's a number of community benefits that we wanted to highlight. First, as you know, there is an existing baseball diamonds at the Hanlon School. It is actually smaller than a little league sized field. So with this project, we're going to enlarge or make a new baseball field so that it's actually a true little league baseball field. In addition, we'll be adding a brand new 11v11 soccer field. We have a purposely increased the gym size so that it's a regulation size court that could host tournaments and can also accommodate two middle school courts crosswise. There's a big gym shortage in this town, so that would address that problem. We believe you could use the stage in this cafeteria as additional performance space for the districts, for local dance schools, or even performances from the high school and the middle school. We are going to ensure that all of the residents can still access Lowell Woods from the Hanlon School site, both before, during, and after construction, with a new trailhead, hopefully, and some parking spaces close to that trailhead. The school will still be walkable for families. And finally, we are going to create new and improved traffic patterns with the school, with long driveways that will keep the carpool and bus queues off of Gay Street and allow parents to park safely in the parking lots, and faculty and staff as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily now, and she's going to walk us through a little bit of history here.
Great, thank you, Maya. So I think it's important just for us to remember the context, and that is that the Westwood School District has 7 buildings. And so we are constantly thinking about our facilities, and there will naturally be a cycle by which we have to address capital needs in our facilities. And so this is just to remind people that in the late 1990s, the community completed an addition and some renovations at Thurston Middle School. Both the Martha Jones and Downey schools were fully renovated in the early 2000s. And of course, the town completed construction on the current Westwood High School, which also includes our preschool facility, in 2005. And so that leaves 3 other buildings in the district: Hanlon, Deerfield, and Sheehan. And as we know, all 3 of those elementary schools are in need of modernization. So the Hanlon Elementary School was built in 1951, Deerfield in 1953, and Sheehan in 1948. And so all 3 of these schools really have some deficiencies in terms of their space as it pertains to our educational programs, especially in special education, art, and music. So if you think about sort of what education looked like, what instruction looked like back in the 50s, it's very different than today. And the spaces as configured in these older buildings just don't support the kind of teaching and learning that we're doing right now. But beyond the educational needs, each one of these schools really needs some significant upgrades, including the things you see here: HVAC, plumbing, electrical, windows, accessibility. The Hanlon needs a roof replacement. And so we have significant capital needs with the facilities that just have to be addressed. Hanlon and Deerfield are technically overcrowded in that both of those buildings have temporary modular classrooms on them, although they're not terribly temporary anymore. So the modulars, for instance, at Deerfield were added in 1995 as a temporary fix for some space needs. At this point, I would say they are pretty much permanent. So all 3 of these schools have needs, but Hanlon was determined to be in the most need of the 3 schools. And that's why this project initially was to address the needs at Hanlon. So Westwood Media Center very nicely created this very quick 2-minute video that will take you inside of the school so you can get a look at some of what some of these needs are. May is telling me that you can't hear the audio. It's just a music background. I apologize. So that gives you a little glimpse inside the buildings. I'm sorry, I was listening to the music through my AirPods, so I enjoyed it. I apologize you couldn't hear it. So part of the reason that we have so much knowledge about what the buildings need is that the school committee in 2015 commissioned a master plan capital needs study. And so we have this study that really outlines in great detail what the needs of the buildings are. And way back in 2015, that study identified next steps. And one of the top priorities was to appropriate funds for further study of the Hanlon site for a potential new elementary school option. And so it was through that master planning that we decided that we would enter into this process to see if we could get the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, to partner with us and to invest in Westwood. We think we really have been faced with this question as a community to repair or to replace. And I put this image up here as something of a metaphor. So this is a 1972 VW wagon. And this was the car that my parents drove when I was a kid. Ours was green and it had primer spots on it. I was that kid driving that car around town. And I put it up here because, you know, I think my parents really instilled in my sister and me this sense that it was important to kind of get all the value you could out of your investment. And so, you know, they drilled in us that you've got to take care of your cars, that you have to change the oil and rotate the tires and go in for the scheduled maintenance. And then you would drive the car and drive it until, you know, it really didn't make any sense to continue to invest in the vehicle any longer. And, you know, I think one of the things that's important here is that even with lots of care, there will be a day when your mechanic is going to tell you that the cost of the repair is greater than the value of the car. And I think that unfortunately that's where we are with some of our elementary schools. But what's more, when I think about this car back in 1972 or 3, it was a good car and it got us where we needed to go back then, but it didn't have anti-lock brakes and it didn't have airbags and it didn't have car seat anchors in the back seat. It certainly didn't have a GPS system. And so, I think that I wouldn't want to drive that car today. I probably wouldn't put my kids in that car. I don't know that it would be considered safe. And we're sort of in a similar situation with our schools at this point. I want to emphasize that there really is no do nothing option for us. So the proposed project is the school department and town solution to address the needs at Hanlon and at Deerfield. The facilities and building systems have reached the end of their useful life. And without this project, the building deficiencies will still need to be addressed. So through this master planning process, we know what the cost of base repair would be for these buildings. And you can see here, the base repair for Hanlon is estimated at $25 million, Deerfield at $16.7 million. And you can see there the assessed value of the buildings. And base repair really only brings the building up to code. It doesn't include any kind of modernization for our current educational needs. And it certainly wouldn't include any of those community benefits that Maya spoke of. Perhaps more significantly, capital repairs or replacement projects that have costs that exceed certain parameters trigger requirements to then bring the building up to code. And so if we were to contemplate trying to kind of keep these buildings on life support in a piecemeal kind of fashion, we would have to do it in a very careful way, or else we risk kind of triggering the requirement to do the full base repair. And finally, just keeping these buildings on life support, so to speak, eats into our ability to maintain our other buildings. So if we continue to invest in these buildings, then that impacts our ability to do what we need to do on a regular basis with some of our other schools. So as I said, we partnered with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which is a quasi-independent public authority that partners with Massachusetts communities to help communities to build schools. We submitted a statement of interest for Hanlon in 2017, and we were accepted into the program in December 2017 on our first submission, which was quite a feat. When we speak to people in other communities, districts often have to apply again and again and again before they're accepted in. And so we were very pleased to be one of, fewer than 20 communities, as I recall, out of 80 some that applied to be accepted in December 2017. After we were accepted in for Hanlon, and to clarify, communities are only permitted to apply for one building at a time. We subsequently met with the MSBA and we really laid out for them that we had several needs. We talked about all 3 elementary schools, and we asked them to expand their investment and assist us in solving sort of for multiple schools. And based on that conversation, they were willing to work with us to consider a project that consolidated 2 schools. So they were able to kind of contribute at that scope. Having done that, the residents appropriated the funds to conduct a feasibility study in May 2018. And then the MSBA voted Westwood into feasibility in February 2019. So we've now been in the feasibility study for just over 2 years. So this feasibility study, this 2-year process, has been very extensive. And as part of that process, in collaboration with the MSBA, we agreed that we would study several possible options for Westwood. So first, we said we would look at building or taking care of Hanlon only, a school for an enrollment of 315 students, and that we would consider what does it take just to do sort of a base repair, renovation only, that we would look at addition and renovation to Hanlon, or we would look at building a new Hanlon. We then also looked at consolidating Hanlon and Deerfield for a design enrollment, a maximum capacity of 560 students. And again, we considered renovation addition options and also new options. All of these options that we looked at were for the current Hanlon site. And then the third big bucket was to consider a consolidation of Hanlon and Sheehan for a design enrollment of 685 students. Again, looking at addition renovations or looking at new. And in this case, we considered Hanlon Sheehan consolidations on the current Hanlon site and also on the current Sheehan site. So there were sort of these three big categories. And then you can see what these numbers represent is that our design team actually presented multiple possible options and designs for some of these categories. So in total, in the feasibility study, we looked at 15 different project options. Throughout the feasibility study, the school committee has been really committed to engaging the community and to making sure that there was back and forth communication. And so you can see here, we've taken many steps since December 2018 to make sure that residents could be involved in this process, including 55 open public meetings dedicated exclusively to the building project. Of those 55 meetings, 13 were community forums, 24 were school building committee meetings, and 18 were SBC subcommittee meetings. The community forums and the school building committee meetings were all videoed by Westwood Media Center and are still available on our elementary school building project website. And I want to emphasize that these forums are really designed to be iterative. And so the timing of the community forums were always at a point in the process where there was something that we wanted to share with the community and something we wanted to get their feedback or their input about. And then the design team was able to consider that information. The SBC could consider the information, and we could come back to the next community forum and say, here's what we heard and what we've done with this information. And now we need to kind of engage people in the next step. So it included visioning for what we wanted the project to be. It included looking at things like redistricting, traffic, you name it. And of course, when the pandemic hit last spring, we pivoted to Zoom as we've had to do with everything. So one of the things that came out of that community process is that the SBC developed our evaluation criteria. So we had 15 different options, and we needed a method for determining what projects should be moving forward. We took the information that we heard from the community and we defined different categories that we would look at with guiding questions associated with each. From that information, we designed an evaluation matrix. And it's not important that you look at all the numbers here, but the idea is that we took these 15 options, we assessed each one against the criteria. From that, the SBC whittled the 15 options to a short list of 7 options. We carried forward the base repair option because the MSBA always wants you to consider that. And then we also had 6 other shortlisted options. And at this point, we were still looking at additions and renos. We were looking at new. We were still looking at Hanlon Deerfield consolidation, still looking at Hanlon Sheehan. We were still looking at both sites and considering all of the options as thoroughly as possible. Once we shortlisted, we knew that we needed to make the evaluation criteria even more granular. And so we took these big categories that we had and we determined 15 different criteria. The school building committee discussed them and we applied or assigned a weighted multiplier to each of the criteria so that we knew that certain things needed to be considered more heavily than others. So if you look at our big categories here, the biggest weight, 35 out of 100 points, was given to our education needs. And the next highest category, 25 out of 100, was assigned to cost. And I just want to kind of zoom in on this purple box here, the cost category, so you can see what I mean about the subcategories. So when we thought about the cost of the project, we looked at the overall cost, meaning literally what was the price tag associated with each of the projects. But we also looked at the net cost to the town for all 3 schools. And I want to emphasize that we know that this project exists in the context of also now having a 3rd school that we will have to address at some point. And so we wanted to find the most beneficial, cost-effective solution to addressing all of those needs. And then, of course, we also looked at ongoing costs associated with each of the projects, busing and operational costs. Through that process, this option, which was option 7, was the one that emerged as the preferred option that has then since moved forward. It's the Hanlon-Deerfield consolidation for 560 students at the Hanlon site. And so from there, having determined that that's the project that would move forward, our design team moved into the schematic design phase, and that has brought us to where we are today. I'm going to turn it back to Maya to talk about cost.
Thanks. So talking about the cost of this project, basically the total project cost is made up of 2 components, construction costs and soft costs. And you can see sort of in this chart, they're broken down. The top green line, construction cost, is the all-in cost of just how much it will cost to build the building. And everything in the light green are what we call soft costs. For the OPM, and the OPM fee is our owner's project manager. So that's the Compass fee. A&E is the architect and engineer fees. FF&E and technology, that's furniture, fixtures, and equipment and technology that we'll need to outfit the school. Permitting, testing, enhanced commissioning, these are all services that we need to move the project forward. And then, of course, we have contingencies built into the budget in case we go over, and those are always calculated as a percentage of the construction costs. So back in August 2020, the school building committee set a preliminary budget based on very high level estimates, the estimates that we had gotten just looking at the very early stages of those proposed designs. And based on those high level estimates, the SBC came up with a target construction cost of $70,381,157. That was the number that the SBC didn't want to go over, and that was really where we wanted the project to be. So we then entered into schematic design and went through a very comprehensive review of construction costs. During schematic design, as Emily mentioned, we really fine-tuned the design and came out to where we are. And once we had that final design, we did a very comprehensive cost estimating exercise where we got new numbers, updated numbers based on all of the design work that had been done. And then we looked at those numbers and did a very robust, what we call value engineering exercise, where the SBC, or the school building committee, broke up into working groups and looked at different areas where we could cut costs. And based on that process, you'll see the top line here, we're now right under our target construction costs. And we came in pretty close there. And the total project cost is at the bottom, and you'll see that we're about $330,000 below the target, which was $88,181,000. We're at $87,820,000 and $386,000. And I just want to emphasize that we will continue to do value engineering during due diligence in the hopes of potentially finding even more savings. But right now we are under the target, and we did a lot of hard work to get there. So looking at the construction costs, we wanted to give everyone sort of a sample of similar projects that are currently happening around us. So as you'll see, the first column, this is our project, the Westwood Hanlon Deerfield project. We are coming in at about $622 per square feet. Medfield is doing a similar project. They're on a similar timeline as we are. They're about 614 square feet. The difference here is we have a geothermal system built into our budget. They are having it as an alternate. So that is not built into that 614 figure. If they decide to go with geothermal, you'd expect to see that number go up. Westboro is doing an elementary school at $652 per square foot. Wellesley is actually doing two projects at the same time, two elementary schools, coming in at $604 and $650. And finally, Ashland, which the town just authorized the funding for this project in January, is at about $645 per square foot. So you can see that we're pretty much in line with all of the other current projects that are going on, which leads us to talking about, looking at the MSBA reimbursement compared to that cost. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily to get into the MSBA's investment.
So obviously we're very interested in maximizing the MSBA's investment in this project. So the way that it works with the MSBA is that communities are given a base rate. Our base rate in Westwood is 35.42%. The base rate is determined, it's related to the economic factors of the community. So different communities have different base rates. Beyond the base rate, there are two opportunities to increase your reimbursement rate. The first one is the maintenance incentive. So communities can get up to 2% added to their reimbursement rate. And this is based on, basically we had to submit all kinds of information that demonstrates our history of maintaining our buildings. And I really want to highlight this because we're very proud of this, that we have been able to get 1.93% out of the two for the maintenance incentive. And our OPM and design team tell us that they haven't seen anything this high in their other projects, that it typically comes in at about 1.4%. And I think this is really a tribute to Ken Aries, our director of operations, and our operations department. Really demonstrates that we've done a good job maintaining our facilities. The second is that we have been able to get an additional 2 percentage points on the reimbursement. It's the green incentive, and basically our design meets the criteria, the sustainability criteria that the MSBA has set out in order to get these 2 incentive points. So our reimbursement rate is 39.35%. However, that reimbursement rate is not applied to the entire cost of the project. So the MSBA reimbursement calculation includes factoring in some excluded costs. So you take the total project cost, subtract the excluded costs, multiply that by the town's reimbursement rate, and that's how you calculate the estimated maximum MSBA reimbursement, or grant, as the MSBA calls it. So what are those exclusions? So there are caps, and then there are other exclusions. So I want to focus first on this cap, because I think it's the biggest driver here. So there's a cap on construction costs. The MSBA cap is $333 per square foot. And so they will not apply the reimbursement to any cost that exceeds $333 per square foot. And as Maya just said, our actual is $622 per square foot. And so that means that we have approximately $19 million that's an excluded cost due to this construction cap. Now, you just saw the comp communities, and you could see that this cost per square foot is really what construction costs are coming in at. And I will go back to that chart in a second, but I just wanted to share with you this chart, which is off of the MSBA website. And basically what it demonstrates is that the MSBA is well aware that their $333 per square foot cap is not in line with current school construction costs. And in fact, 2011 down here was the last time that the cost of new construction aligned with the MSBA allowable reimbursement. And they have not increased this cap since sometime in 2013. So the MSBA is very clear and upfront that they know that this cap doesn't cover the cost of the project, but they have sort of one pot of money, and this is a mechanism they use to ensure that that pot of money is spread around and shared with many communities. So the cap on construction costs is a big driver. The other one is site costs. And so they cap their reimbursement at 8%, site costs at 8% of construction costs. And they do this because they know that there are significant differences between the sites in suburban communities and urban communities. So, you know, we're planning fields, we'll have a parking lot. These are things that aren't possible at some of the sites in the city. And so again, this is a way that they create some equity in the program. So that's about $6.7 million in excluded costs. They cap FF&E at $2,400 per student. Our budget is for $3,293 per student, which our design team believes is a realistic estimate. So that's about 1.8 million. And this is in keeping with what other communities see. The other caps are on the architect fee, the soft costs, and the OPM fee. And our project is below their caps in all three of those categories. The other thing that factors in to the exclusions has to do with the space. So the MSBA allows schools to be designed with certain spaces for specific functions at specific square footage. So they would say, well, if you're building an elementary school for 560 students, this is how many classrooms you get, right? So they have an elaborate spreadsheet where all of the eligible spaces are listed. And so we are very much in line with that, with a couple of exceptions. So the first exception is the gym. The MSBA allowance for an elementary school is a 6,000 square foot gym. We did a lot of work during the feasibility study to hear from the community. We met with people from various youth sports organizations. We talked to the recreation department, obviously thought about our school needs, and there's clearly a desire and a need for additional gym space in Westwood. And so our school has been designed to include a 12,000 square foot gym. So the MSBA will apply their reimbursement to the first 6,000 square feet, but the other 6,000 square feet are excluded from the reimbursement. In terms of our educational spaces, there are areas in this new building that we call extended learning areas. We think they're very essential for our particular educational program. The MSBA allowance is 2,800 square feet. We're at 6,800, so 4,000 square feet is excluded from the reimbursement. We have two other small things. We need an extended day office, extended day as part of our program in Westwood, and a mother's room, which is required by law. Strangely, the MSBA allowance is 0 for those items. And so we have 650 square feet that's excluded there. You can see that our staff room is a little bit bigger. And then there's a grossing multiplier for these that just have to do with accounting for walls and whatnot. So that brings us to a total of 17,089 square feet that are excluded from the reimbursement. And so it's a relatively very small portion of the overall project. The project, generally speaking, is right in line with what the MSBA says is sort of a reasonable size elementary school. So as Maya mentioned, our project cost is estimated here at $87.8 million. Taking into account those caps and that square footage exclusion, we have to subtract out a little over 37 million in excluded construction costs and 3.6 million in excluded soft costs. So that brings our total eligible cost for reimbursement to just over $47 million. And we have an asterisk here because everything is subject to MSBA audit. So these are our estimates. So we take our total eligible project cost and multiply it by our reimbursement rate, 39.35%. And based on that, we believe that the maximum total facilities grant from the MSBA will be about $18.5 million. So a significant investment in Westwood. So if we take our total project cost and we subtract out our anticipated grant from the MSBA, that leaves the town share at $69,276,959. And that makes our effective reimbursement rate 21.12%. And I'm going to turn it over to Pam because she's going to talk to us about debt estimates and tax impact. Or I think I can't see Pam. Is she on?
Amazon, we just moved her in.
Okay.
Okay, great. Oh, great. Thanks.
Okay, I'll just go through this slide quickly. I think we've done this before with the FinCom. But as Emily said, she's showing the total cost of the project, the 87.8 million, less the expected MSBA reimbursement would be 18.5 million, meaning the town's share of this would be $69.2 million. I do want to point out that the MSBA pays their share on a pay-as-you-go basis. So as this project was being constructed and built and moving forward, each month we would submit our bills to the MSBA and they would pay their share of those bills each month. I point that out because that is different than how the MSBA worked in the past. It's different than how it was for our high school project. So the prior MSBA program, the town had to issue the full debt and then the MSBA would pay us an annual amount towards the debt service. So we still have that now for the high school. We have 2 years remaining on our 20-year high school bond, and we receive a payment of $1.4 million a year from MSBA that must go directly towards the debt service. So if you see that in our budget, that will end the 1.4 million when the high school bond ends. Now the MSBA pays as you go. The town would never issue the full bond. We would be issuing the net bond. So 69.2 million. So here the town would look at issuing a 30-year level debt service bond. We would do a 30-year to extend the principal and interest payments of this over a longer term period. 30 years is the maximum that we are allowed to borrow. That does make it more equitable to our residents. We're not putting more of the cost on our residents today. We're spreading it out so that residents who move into town in 15, 20, 25 years will also pay their share towards this project. So again, our high school bond was 20 years, but we would now be doing a 30-year bond. We did do a 30-year bond for our police station. Again, it is a more equitable way to spread the cost over future residents of the town. We would also, for this project, because of the size of this, be doing a level debt service bond, meaning that our payment in principal and interest each year would be the same amount over the 30-year term, much like you would have with your mortgage. Again, that's done so that we don't have a higher cost in the early years and impact our current residents more than our future residents. So typically our debt is a declining interest payment. And so there's higher payments in the first year, and over the life of the bond, the payments drop. This we would do as a level debt payment again, to be more equitable to our current residents, not charge them more in the beginning, but make that an even payment stream over the life of the bond. So based on those assumptions, a 30-year level debt service bond, and we're using an estimate of a 4% interest rate. That's a conservative number. We would anticipate getting a lower rate when we actually issue the bond. But because we wouldn't be issuing this full bond for a couple of years, we want to show conservative numbers. So we're using the 4%. So the chart here in the middle shows you the total cost of that bond over the 30-year period. In this column, the column on the left, and then shows the cost for each year over that 30-year period. So we would pay $4 million a year for principal and interest. The middle column shows the cost of that debt per $100,000 of home value. So total cost for this whole project, just over $2,100 per $100,000 of home value, or $72 a year. And then finally, this column on the right shows for our average home, Department of Revenue right now calculates that as about an $837,000 home with a current tax bill of $12,375. The impact for that average home would be in total $17,970 for the debt, or about $599 a year. So again, that's just taking the 837,000, using this multiplier of the cost per 100,000 of home value. So an annual cost of about $599. As we've talked about before, we are ending our payments on the high school. We issued a 20-year bond for that. We will be completing the payment of that bond in fiscal 23. So we have 2 more payments left. That project was about a $44 million project. The MSBA did pay 59% reimbursement for that project. It was much different rules and much more generous rules 20 years ago than it is now. At the time of our last payment, and as I said, debt used to be issued, it started higher and declined. At the time of our last payment, the payment for the high school net of MSBA would be about $406,000. That's $7.20 per 100,000 of home value, or $60 for this home that we're showing here. So the net amount when the new bond comes on, but the high school drops off, is this final line. So for this house, $837,000 home, the net amount would be on taxes an increase of $539, or about $65 per $100,000 of home value. And people could take their individual house value and multiply using this $100,000 option. But again, for this average home, about $539 increase when we look at the new cost coming on and the high school bond rolling off.
Great, thanks, Pam.
Okay, and so now what we have up here is where we are, right? This is the project schedule. And so we're talking about the bridge funding, and that would be at this town meeting vote in May of 2021. If the bridge funding is approved, we would move into what we call design development, where the architects and engineers would develop the design documents. We would then have the vote for the full project in the fall, October, November of 2021. And at that point, we would ask the town to vote for the entire cost of the project. It would be a not to exceed number. Assuming that vote is approved by the town, we would then move into bid documents. And that would get us to a construction starting date of about July 2022 with an move-in date of February 2024. And that's the expected occupancy, and a final completion of August 2024. And that's with all of the fields and the parking and everything completed. And the reason we're putting up this slide is because the purpose of this bridge funding that we're asking for in this warrant article is to keep us on budget and on this particular schedule. If we did not have this bridge funding in place, if we held off and waited until the fall to start the design documents, then the project would be pushed by about 5 to 6 months, and we'd have two consequences because of that delay. First, we would have an increase in the overall cost of the project due to just regular cost escalation that occurs in construction projects if you delay them. And second, our schedule would likewise be pushed. We would end up starting construction in December of 2022, which is winter. And that's definitely in New England, not an ideal time to start a project. So in order to save time and to save cost and to save the budget, we're here in front of you explaining and asking the town to vote for this bridge funding. So what is the bridge funding exactly? What are we getting for it? Again, as I said, this would allow us about 6 months from May to October for design development. And this is the breakdown of the bridge funding request. Compass would be receiving their fee for 6 months, so that's about $120,000. And Compass would also be going out and acquiring cost estimating services for the design development documents, and that's an additional fee. And then Doran Whittier has something they call basic services and then extra services. The basic services are sort of what their standard services are, and the extra services really are just consultants that they need to perform the work. It's not extra work they need to do. It's really for outside consultants. And that's about $86,000. So the total design development fees we anticipate in this 6 month time frame is about $1.46 million. And that's the amount that we are going to be asking the town for at town meeting. I need to stress 2 points here. This bridge funding just does not add to the project costs. It is not in addition to that $87 million figure we showed earlier. It's simply an upfront portion of the total project cost. We're just asking for $1.46 million earlier than the fall. And also this borrowing would not require an override, so it would not impact resident taxes in fiscal year 22. So this really is the summary of the bridge funding request. One question that we continue to get every time we have the school project come up is, well, what about Sheehan? And so we did want to address that in this presentation. So we do need to address the Sheehan school. The school district needs to address the Sheehan school for the same reasons we discussed above regarding Hanlon and Deerfield. Similar issues with, we are approaching the end of the useful life if we're not already there for this building. And the school committee is keenly aware of the fact that we did have 3 schools come out of that master capital needs study. And so in February of 2020, more than a year ago, the school committee allocated about $30,000 to do a high-level design study of whatever school was not going to be part of the MSBA project. At that time, we did not know which school it was. When the SBC voted for this Hanlon Deerfield project, that's when the school committee specifically allocated that $30,000 for Sheehan. And during the summer and into the fall, Doran Whittier began working on alternate high-level designs for Sheehan. And they really looked at 3 things. How much would it cost to bring the base building up to code? What would be options for renovating and adding on to Sheehan? And what would be options for building an entirely new Sheehan? So this spring, 2021, the school committee expects presentation from Doran Whittier on these design options. And working with Doran Whittier and Compass, we then mapped out what we feel is a potential workable schedule for a Sheehan project. And that's what you see here. So here we would have spring 2021, I just mentioned, we would sort of start this project process all over again, but for Sheehan, where we look at these options, we engage the community, and we figure out which project is going to move forward. And then, conscious of the fact that we do have another project going on, we thought that spring 2023, which is about 2 years from now, we would ask for the town vote for just for designs funds through bidding. So not for the entire project cost, but just for funds to get us through the bidding process with the contractors. In fall 2024, a year and a half later, we would ask for the remainder of the project funds. And finally, in September 2026, which is 2.5 years after the expected occupancy of the Hanlon Deerfield School, we would anticipate the occupancy of the new Sheehan School. So this is a timeline that we feel is workable from a process perspective. Yeah, again, this is another town project, so we realize that there are other projects and you know, residents may have other feelings about this, but we did want to put forward our thoughts on how we see Sheehan moving forward. So I think that is the end of the presentation. And at this point, we know we've given you a lot of information, but we want to open it up to questions, comments. And we do have members of the architect and our OPM are also here in case, you know, we may have technical questions as well.
Hey, I just want to mention that Carol texted me to say we had one math problem on our program exclusion slide with the staff room square footage. And so I do realize that there's a mistake there. I think that the excluded square footage is actually less than what I have on the slide. Should be about 450 square feet, but apologize for that. And at 10 p.m. I can't quite figure that out at the moment, but I think Chin might be able to give us the information.
Yeah, this is Peter. Just wanted to first of all say thanks. That was a great presentation. That really, although you've given us other presentations before I thought at the time were all encompassing, this really did a lot more, in my view, on the financial side and the reimbursement side. And so I really appreciate that. Kind of alleviates some of the questions I have. Let me see, Jane, I was hoping maybe, May, if you could stop sharing, and then we could see a total gallery view of all the folks so that I have a better sense of who would like to ask questions when. Thank you. So really just a comment on that. And let me just open it up. Lauren's got her hand raised. So why don't you start us off, Lauren?
Yeah, no, that was great presentation, good detail and everything. But so depending on, you know, if this moves forward and everything, what is the plan for the Deerfield School? What are you going to do with the building?
So the Deerfield is currently under the control, clearly, of the school district. And depending on what happens with Sheehan, we may need that for swing space if we're thinking of doing an ad reno for the existing Sheehan. But at some point, if the school district determines that it no longer has any school use for Deerfield, then it would turn the school back over to the town, and it would become up to the town as to what happens to the building and to the site.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Other folks from FinCom? I saw Peter Ittig.
Yes, I have, let's see, I would like to ask a question and make a comment, actually. But the article that is currently before us and before the town meeting asks for about $1.5 million for the new project as bridge funding. And I am still uncertain about whether this may be premature, as it is only needed if the voters will approve the proposed about $88 million override for the new school. And I'm wondering about whether it might be appropriate to wait to see if the voters will approve that override. But I have a particular concern with the costs. The estimates provided by Pam in January were for about $73 added to the taxes. The latest estimate that you presented a few minutes ago was $72 per $100,000 assessed value. But this translates to about a 5% increase in the average property tax bill on homes in Westwood. If this is done as the high school bond is paid off in 2 years, the net increase will be about 4.5% in the average property tax on homes. And of course, this will be on top of the usual increase of about 3% for operating expenses, for a total increase of about 7.5% or 8%. And this is a large tax increase that will be difficult for some taxpayers. I'm also concerned that there are additional overrides probably in the works that will be introduced soon. One you mentioned is for the Sheehan School, and there may be another to replace the fire station. And I'm concerned about the total impact of all of these proposals on the property taxes in Westwood. At some point, I hope we could get an estimate of the total of those. But I have a particular concern about the tax consequences of the proposed overrides for seniors in Westwood living on a fixed income or relatively fixed income. About 1 in 5 Westwood residents are over 65. And this year, for example, the Social Security pension went up by 1.3%, while the Westwood property taxes went up by an average of 3% and are projected to rise by 3.08% next year. This typical behavior causes seniors' budgets to get tighter every year. But I would like to encourage some consideration of a concession of some sort for seniors to encourage them to support these overrides. I think it might be possible for the select board to do something such as a split tax rate for seniors. And I hope we might be able to discuss something like that at some point.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
But
Peter.
I'm interested in a reaction on the issue of the consequences of delaying the $1.5 million bridge funding to wait to see if the town will approve the main $88 million override for the new school.
So the SBC did debate that very question. Does it make sense to have this vote now, or does it make sense to delay and have it in the fall? The reason for the initial delay was originally we had planned to have the entire project this spring, but clearly COVID got in the way of that, and we are very sensitive to the economic concerns that a lot of our residents have as a result of COVID. So the SBC did agree that it made the most sense to push the project vote to the fall. However, as I mentioned, that did cause concern on two fronts, on a budget front and a scheduling front. And I think the SBC was worried that those two issues would create an even more expensive project than it is now. And, we're very conscious of the impact to the taxpayer. There's no doubt that this is a big town project. This is a big tax project. And in order to keep those costs down, we thought it was worth putting this to the town and saying, let's see if you can give us this 1.5 or 1.46 million now, we could, it would be the most efficient use of the overall project funds. Also, I do also want to emphasize the MSBA participation here. With doing this kind of project without the MSBA, it would cost the town about $88 million total. And that's in line with other schools. That's really how much it costs to build an elementary school of this size. This is not an excess school. We are very much aware of the need for parity with the other elementary schools. And we are not trying to build the Taj Mahal. We are really just trying to build a nice school that delivers the educational programming that we want to give. But having said that, the MSBA participation here is allowing us to do two things. First, it's bringing the overall cost of this project down by almost $20 million to a $68 million project. And second, it's also allowing us to solve for two schools. This isn't just a Hanlon project, this is a Hanlon Deerfield project. So we're solving for two schools here for the price of one. And I really want to emphasize that because I think this is a unique and an important economic opportunity for Westwood. And I'm hoping that residents, that will resonate with residents and that they'll understand that. But thank you. I understand your concerns. Certainly seniors are a big concern. I know that there are programs in Westwood that are available to them, but we certainly should not discount the importance of the impact this will have on them.
I guess my commentary, about concerns about future projects. Certainly, we all have concerns about future projects, but I think the town has been pretty clear that this is the most important project that they see. And so I think that's what we really have to address. And I'm not putting my head in the sand about other things, but this is what's in front of us. And the town has spoken, the select board has said, this is the number one priority for the town. So, and I don't know if anybody else, Mr. Hickey or Mr. Coleman or whoever would like to comment on that. If not, we have a couple other hands raised that I will go to those folks.
Can I just to add to Peter, I just want a better understanding. So Maya, you mentioned, so you were talking about the importance of the MSBA and their participation. So if the town didn't vote, is there some sort of a connection that maybe I'm missing in terms of, voting for the bridge funding in advance for that?
So no,
okay.
For the MSBA participation, no. If the town does not vote for the bridge funding in the spring, we would simply delay the project and ask the town to vote for the full amount in the fall. If the town does not vote for the project in the fall, then we would most likely lose the participation of the MSBA. We would have the ability to ask the town again for this project, but there is a time frame by which you have to use the funds from when the MSBA approves it to when the town has to approve it. And we're already getting an extension on that from the MSBA for this delay to the fall. So it would be very challenging if the town doesn't approve it in the fall. It would be very challenging to continue with the MSBA participation. But to directly answer your question, no, we do not need a yes vote this spring to continue with the MSBA participation.
Okay, so, but I do think that Peter has a legitimate concern with the potential of losing the 1.4 million if the town votes against it.
Right.
So I don't think that we should disregard that fact that is overall, with the project being taken into consideration. I understand that that's a small number, but it's still a big loss if the town votes against it.
It's true. It is at risk. You're absolutely right. I'll point out that the 1.75 from feasibility would then also similarly would be at risk as well. But you're absolutely right. The 1.4, while if the project passes, would be reimbursable by the MSBA. If it doesn't pass, then it's at risk. Yes.
And then I just had one more question. During the presentation, I know Emily mentioned that there was approximately 17,000 square feet that would be excluded, although a small portion of the project as well. But I was just curious, what is that? How much does that equate to in terms of costs?
It's, as I recall, about $10 million. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maya, but I think that's right. That's what it is. Yep. And so a portion of that is additional, what I would call learning space, right, for our extended learning areas. And then a significant portion of that excluded cost is for the gym.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Diane, you had your hand raised. We can open.
Yeah, this is just a comment. I've been following this project for as long as the project's been out there and being discussed, and have been to a lot of these meetings. And I just have to comment on the thoroughness of the presentation tonight that truly just addressed, I believe, a lot of the comments that you've received from this committee as well as from other members. And I just can't help but saying how impressed I was with the completeness and the thoroughness, and that you were able to put so much information in for such a long time frame into the presentation tonight. So, you certainly have answered my questions, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
I concur, yeah. George, you had your hand raised also.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at this more on a global point, but I want to confirm some numbers, because I was really, first I thought, Emily, you did a nice job. And, but the couple of questions that I had, it seemed like you answered them. The fields would be accessible for the crosstown. You're talking about the gym for the entire community, an extended day learning for the entire community. But what kind of impressed me or knocked me off is, I believe you said $41.7 million is just the required repairs to bring the buildings combined to, the state code. So just to do the basic repairs that are needed, it was 41.7 million. But to do the project in its whole, it would be 88 million. So add that, take that away, and then add in the I don't know what the acronym is, the
MSBA.
MSBA at 18.5. You're talking maybe my numbers are close, but about a $28 million delta. So the real expense here is about 27.8 million, which is definitely a large amount of money, but that's the real expense. I mean, we can't look at, in my opinion, we can't look at it as 88 million, because we're still going to have a $41.7 million expense. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And when I say, George, that there is no do nothing option, that's exactly what I mean. And and that is our concern, that this we think is the way forward. And if we were to not take this path forward, we would still have $41 million in base repair to somehow address between those two buildings.
So
I mean, there's no doubt that this, and that would be without MSBA participation, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt that this is a significant project, and it's an investment in the future. It's a 70-year investment in our schools.
And I hear that, and I see that. I don't know if I believe it's 70 years. I was at the Thurston when you did the renovations in 91 or 1992. And I believe you had to redo them again about 15 years later. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's I don't think it's a 70-year investment, but what I really am shocked as is that you can't do nothing. We either spend 41 or we spend the 88 and get reimbursed the 18. So we're really at a 28 delta. And I really think that, for presentation purposes, needs to be put a flashlight on it or something, because that's the reality of it. And it is an impact to the real estate taxes. Peter is 100% correct, but I question, Peter mentioned roughly a 7% increase in his real estate taxes in a year, which is a huge increase. But I would then ask a real estate professional or somebody, what was the increase in value of your house in the past year? Did it go up by 7%? Did it go up by 10%? What was the valuation? So yeah, real estate taxes are going up, but the valuation of your house is going up too. Thank you, Peter Lenz.
Okay. Thanks, George. Some good points here. So what I'd like to do is say, keep this open to FinCom members and FinCom members that haven't said anything yet about this particular topic, so that we make sure we give everyone a chance, because we are, limited in time. It's getting close to 10 past 10 at this point in time. So anybody else in FinCom? I see Mike Powers.
It's my understanding that there's no excess funds, Emily, in the capital fund to help, that would support the $41 million need into the future for repair. You haven't stocked any money away. There's nothing there, right?
No, there's not. So we, our annual capital budget is something that I would say that our needs typically exceed our annual capital allocation. So,
Emily, I would add, we have some roofing money, for example, that we've set aside intentionally, but it doesn't approach the $41 million cost. That would be, funding that we would need in case there's an emergency roof repair at any one of our 7 buildings.
So I guess
that range of $500K. Sorry.
That just goes to the point that we would have to ask the community for the $41 million anyway, at some point, just to do the ongoing repair.
Yeah, at some point we would have to have a plan to move forward with those repairs in some fashion over a period of time.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else from FinCom who hasn't asked a question here? Okay, Jane, I have not seen anything in the Q&A or anyone raising their hand in the public. Do you see anything?
There's something in the Q&A, but it's from the planning board.
Yeah,
so
that's the
we
prior
can
one.
save that
Yeah,
till the
so I
end.
just ignored that one. Yeah.
Other than that, no, none of the attendees have their hands raised.
Okay. All right. So with that said, I want to thank you folks again for the presentation. That was amazing. I think it's really something that anybody could pick up and really kind of understand this project and kind of the decision that we have to make here. So thanks again. That was great.
All right, well, thank you for having us.
Okay.
I'll put it a plug for our next community forum on March 18th. So we'll be
There you go.
taking questions from the community then as well.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks. Okay, so then on to business for FinCom specifically. So under new business that we had in the agenda, let me just make a couple of quick comments. There was some emails and texts about the timing of tonight and some of the presentations. So we certainly were we were early on the select board articles, and we had a lot of good presentations associated with and questions associated with the planning board article. So when you really look at when we got to the school warrant, we were really less than 10 minutes over our allotted agenda time. So what I did is I purposely took the amount that we underran on the select board articles and allowed a little bit more discussion maybe than normal, but I think very important discussion on the planning board articles. So I wasn't ignoring folks. I was just really saying that I think this is worthwhile. And really what I was trying to do is we have on the agenda the possibility to meet tomorrow if we couldn't get through all this stuff. And I really didn't want to meet tomorrow. So I just wanted to make sure we got through as much as we could. So I just wanted to kind of add that point on that. So as far as new business, we have, excuse me, we have to approve the February minutes. Now the February minutes were sent out to everyone. Is there any discussion related to those February minutes? Seeing nobody raise their hand, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Got a
George
second?
Hertz. I've got George Hertz.
Okay.
I'll take the roll, Peter.
Yes?
Peter Lentz,
Yes. Sorry.
Bill Bruce,
Yes.
Jim Ferraro,
Yes.
Lauren Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Craig Fiscaldo,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Angela Hughes,
Yes.
Peter Idig.
You're muted, Peter.
You're muted, Peter.
How about,
Sorry about that. Yes.
Thank you. Caitlin,
Yes.
Tommy,
Yes.
George Laham,
Yes.
Diane McCarthy,
Yes.
Mike Powers,
Yes.
and Kate Wynn.
Yes.
Thank you.
okay. Then in terms of old business, the October minutes, we had a motion last meeting. I'm sorry?
Nothing.
Okay. We had a motion last meeting to revise the October minutes. We've sent out those revised minutes. Or any discussion regarding those revised minutes? Seeing no one's hands raised, do we have a motion to approve the revised October minutes?
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Okay.
Uh, Peter Lentz,
Yes.
Bill Bruce,
Yes.
Jim Ferraro,
Yes.
Lauren Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Craig Fiscaldo,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Angela Hughes,
Yes.
Peter Ittig,
Yes.
Caitlin Jerzak,
Yes.
Tom Kilgariff,
Yes.
George Lehan,
You, George.
or you? Thank you, got it. Diane McDonald, Diane
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Mike Powers,
Yes.
and Kate Wynn.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And so our next meeting is Tuesday, March 16th, where we're looking forward to going over the FinCom subcommittee reports. And with that, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Second.
Peter Lentz,
Yes.
Bill Bruce,
Yes.
Jim Ferraro,
Yes.
Lauren Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Craig Fiscaldo,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Angela Hughes,
Yes.
Peter Ittig,
Yes.
Caitlin Jerzak,
Yes.
Tom Kilgariff,
Yes.
George Lehan,
Yes.
Diane McCarthy,
Yes.
Mike Powers,
Yes.
and Kate Wynn.
Yes.
10:16.
Okay. Thanks to all for hanging in there. That was a good meeting.
Good
Appreciate it.
meeting.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.